Mia lived with her parents in a small house on the edge of a quiet town. She loved to ride her bike on the dirt roads nearby. One day she noticed an old boarded-up barn at the end of a long, twisting path. She had passed it many times, but she never felt drawn to it until now. The boards looked rotten and broken windows stared like empty eyes. She parked her bike under a tree and walked closer. The air felt cold even though the sun was warm. A strange silence fell over the place. No birds sang. No leaves rustled. Mia felt a chill on her arms, raising tiny bumps on her skin. Slowly she peeked through a gap in the boards. The inside was dark, filled with shadows. She thought she saw a shape move, but maybe it was just a trick of the light. Still, her heart began to pound. She turned away, deciding it was better to go home. As she walked back to her bike, she felt as if someone was watching her from inside the barn. That night, Mia could not stop thinking about it. Her parents noticed she was quiet, but she said she was just tired. In bed, she stared at the ceiling and pictured the barn's black windows. She wondered what was inside. The next morning, she told her best friend, Noah, about the barn. He listened with wide eyes, excited by the idea of a mystery. "Let's go explore," he said, grinning. Mia felt torn. She was curious, but she also felt afraid. In the end, she agreed. They planned to meet that afternoon and ride their bikes together. When they reached the old barn, clouds covered the sun, making the sky gloomy. The air felt even colder than before. Mia and Noah stood in front of the tall door, trying to muster courage. The boards smelled like mildew. A rusty lock hung from a chain, but it looked weak. Noah found a rock and tapped the lock. The sound echoed in the silent yard. Mia's heart beat fast as she glanced at the windows again. They reminded her of hollow eyes. She placed a hand on the door's rough wood. It felt damp and slimy. Then, without warning, the wind picked up. It whipped their hair around and made the loose boards rattle. They jumped back, startled. The lock clattered and the chain slipped loose. The heavy door creaked open a few inches on its own, as if someone on the other side had gently pushed it. Mia and Noah exchanged a fearful look. This was no normal barn. Something about it felt wrong. Yet they both felt pulled inside. Holding hands, they stepped forward, not sure what they would find. They only knew they were about to uncover a secret that might change their world forever. A musty smell washed over Mia and Noah as they stepped through the half-open barn door. Dust danced in the weak light. Their shoes crunched on hay and bits of broken wood. The inside was bigger than they expected, with a tall roof and rows of stalls along the walls. Noah fumbled for his flashlight, clicking it on. The beam cut through the dim space. Spiderwebs clung to old beams and strange marks covered the walls. Mia saw scratches as though something had clawed at the boards. She swallowed hard, wondering what could make such deep grooves. They inched forward, shining light into each stall. Most were empty, filled only with piles of straw. Then near the back they found a stall that was not empty. A tattered chair sat in the corner, and beside it lay a torn blanket. Mia felt a prick of unease. Who had been here? Why would anyone rest in this creepy barn? A sudden scuttling sound made them both jump. They spun around, expecting to see something lurking in the shadows. Instead, a rat dashed across the floor and disappeared into a hole. Mia let out the breath she'd been holding, and Noah laughed nervously. Still, something about this place felt off. The air seemed heavy, almost like it was pressing down on their shoulders. Mia felt a tingle in her spine. She looked at Noah, who gave a shaky nod as if saying they should keep going. They spotted a ladder leading up to a loft. Mia's hands trembled as she grabbed each rung. Noah followed, shining the flashlight above her. At the top, the floorboards creaked. A tiny window let in a thin strip of light. Strange shapes hung from the beams, rusty hooks or tools Mia couldn't tell. Noah panned the light around and Mia gasped. In one corner, there was a stack of old newspapers and empty cans. It looked like someone had been staying here, hiding away from the world below. A sudden gust made the window rattle, and the papers rustled as if touched by unseen hands. Then Mia thought she heard a low whisper. She froze, listening. Noah heard it too, judging by the fear in his eyes. They stood very still, hearts pounding. The whisper came again, too soft to understand. Mia's mind raced. Was someone else in here with them? Or was the barn itself alive with eerie sounds? Noah motioned for them to climb back down. Carefully, they descended the ladder, each step echoing in the dark. When they reached the barn floor, they noticed that the door they had left slightly open was now shut tight. Mia felt a jolt of alarm. Did the wind blow it closed, or had someone slammed it? Hands shaking, Noah pulled on the door, but it wouldn't budge. It felt locked or blocked from the outside. They were trapped. In the gloom, the barn seemed to breathe around them as if waking from a long sleep. Mia's pulse pounded like a drum as she and Noah tried to open the barn door again. It was solid and unyielding. No matter how hard they pulled, it stayed shut. "We're stuck," Noah muttered, his flashlight trembling in his grip. Panic prickled at Mia's mind. She thought about calling for help, but who would hear them way out here? Even if they screamed, the only things around were fields and a few distant trees. The sound might not carry far. She remembered her phone in her pocket. Quickly she took it out, but the screen showed no signal. She lifted it higher, hoping for even a single bar. Nothing. The barn's thick walls and remote location left them isolated. Mia exhaled slowly, trying to stay calm. Noah's flashlight beam skimmed over the walls again. "Maybe there's another exit," he said, sounding braver than he looked. They walked along the stalls, checking each corner. Most just led to boarded-up windows or broken gates. The smell of wet hay and mold grew stronger. Then they reached a large wooden storage closet at the back. Mia noticed faint footprints in the dust. They looked recent, like someone with large boots had paced here. She swallowed, remembering the torn blanket and chair. Could the owner of those footprints still be inside? Noah grabbed the closet handle, but it too was locked. He stepped back and kicked at it. The barn echoed with the loud bang of his shoe against the old wood. Mia jumped, her nerves on edge. After 3 kicks, the door finally cracked and swung open. Inside was a cramped space piled with sacks of grain and old tools. At first glance it seemed empty. But as Mia leaned in, she noticed a narrow door in the floor, like a trapdoor leading down. Her heart thudded. This barn had more secrets than she'd ever guessed. They moved aside the sacks until the trapdoor lay clear. It had no lock, just a rusty handle. Noah grabbed it and pulled. The door creaked open, revealing a steep set of stairs descending into darkness. A foul odor wafted up, like damp earth mixed with decay. Mia felt a surge of dread. Still, they had few choices. The main door was blocked, the windows were boarded, and no one was around to rescue them. She looked at Noah, who gave a tight nod. Together they took the first steps down. The stairs groaned with each step, and the flashlight's beam shook across dirt walls. Cold air clung to their skin. It felt older down here, as if the barn's real secrets were buried underground. Mia tried not to imagine what might wait for them at the bottom. When they reached the last step, they found themselves in a narrow tunnel. The ceiling was low, forcing them to crouch. The flashlight revealed wooden beams overhead, holding up the earth. Mia's stomach churned. There was no turning back now. The tunnel smelled stale and the walls felt damp. Mia and Noah could see their breath in the faint flashlight beam. Each careful step took them deeper into the hidden passage under the barn. Loose gravel crunched under their feet. They noticed strange symbols carved into the wooden beams. The marks were rough, like someone had scratched them in a hurry. Noah paused to shine the light on one set of carvings. It looked like a circle with lines shooting out, almost like a sun, but twisted. Mia felt uneasy just looking at it. They kept going, hearts pounding. The corridor turned left, then right, as if it had been dug in a winding pattern. The further they went, the quieter everything seemed. It was almost as if the air was pressing in on them, muffling their words and footsteps. At last, they reached a small chamber. The flashlight caught glimpses of piles on the floor, old crates, broken chairs, and ragged blankets. Mia saw a table in the center with a single candle holder on top. The candle was melted to a stub, its wax dripping down like frozen tears. Then they heard a soft sound that made them both jump. It was a low moan, echoing off the dirt walls. Mia's stomach twisted with fear. She aimed the light around, searching the shadows. The moan came again, softer this time, like someone in pain or sorrow. Noah stepped closer to the piles of junk. "Hello?" he said, voice trembling. Mia held her breath. For a moment, all was silent again. Then, behind a tall stack of crates, something moved. The crates teetered, and a figure stumbled into the weak glow of the flashlight. It was a man, his clothes torn and dusty. He looked thin and scared. His eyes were wide, like he had seen too many horrible things. Mia gasped as he raised a trembling hand. "Help me," he whispered, voice cracking. Noah rushed forward, ready to help the stranger stand. But the man shrank back, fear on his face. Mia wondered how long he'd been down here. Did he live under the barn? The man glanced at them, then at the tunnel. He shook his head in warning. "It hears everything," he muttered. "Every sound." His words sent a chill through Mia. She had no idea what it meant, but she felt certain it was something awful. Suddenly, a scraping noise filled the tunnel, like claws dragging on dirt. The man's eyes grew even wider, and he scrambled behind the crates. Mia and Noah spun around, flashlight flicking across the walls. Something was coming. They could hear it scraping closer, each drag louder than the last. They looked at each other, terror clear in their expressions. There was no easy way out of this chamber. Whatever lurked in the darkness was between them and the stairs leading back up. Mia clutched Noah's arm, bracing herself for the horror that might appear. The scraping sound echoed louder, then stopped. The silence was worse than the noise. Mia's heart pounded so fiercely she thought it would burst. She and Noah stood shoulder to shoulder, the flashlight shaking in Noah's unsteady hand. The man behind the crates whimpered softly. For a moment nothing happened. Then a shape slid into view at the chamber's entrance. It was too dark to see clearly, but it looked tall and hunched. Mia glimpsed something like bony limbs. She tried not to scream. Noah aimed the flashlight at it. The beam caught a glimpse of pale, stretched skin. The creature hissed and backed away from the light, moving out of sight. Mia felt her legs go weak. This thing was real and it was blocking their escape route. The man behind the crates let out another whimper. His voice shook. "I tried to leave before," he whispered, "but it wouldn't let me." Mia shuddered, realizing he must have been trapped down here for a long time. Maybe the barn's locked door was no accident. Noah pointed the flashlight at the side of the chamber, searching for another exit. He spotted what looked like a small tunnel just wide enough to crawl through. "We can try that," he said quietly to Mia. The creature hissed again, closer this time. Mia felt a rush of panic. They had to move fast. She pulled the frightened man to his feet, and Noah led the way to the crawl space. One by one they squeezed inside. The space was cramped, forcing them to shuffle on hands and knees. Behind them, they heard the creature scuttle into the chamber, claws scraping. Mia's hair stood on end. She pictured it lunging at them at any moment. They moved as quickly as they could, crawling deeper into the darkness. At times, the tunnel narrowed so much that Mia's shoulders brushed both sides. The air smelled damp and rotten, and her lungs felt tight with fear. Noah's flashlight guided them forward, though its beam was shaky. They heard the creature scraping behind them, trying to follow. Each scratch on the dirt walls sent sparks of terror through Mia's mind. The man breathed in ragged gasps, clearly exhausted. Finally, the tunnel opened into a slightly larger passage. Mia could stand up again, though her back brushed the low ceiling. She spotted a faint glow ahead, like distant daylight. Could it be an exit? They stumbled toward the light, hearts pounding. When they reached it, they found a small hole in the earthen wall. Bright beams of day shone through, revealing a lattice of roots that blocked the opening. They were so close to freedom, but the roots were like a thick net. Noah handed the flashlight to Mia and began pulling at the roots. The man tried to help, though he was weak. Mia kept watch, shining the light back down the tunnel. The scraping sounds grew louder, telling her the creature was near. Time was running out. Noah tore at the tangled roots, fingers slipping on the damp vines. The man helped, though his hands shook with fear. Bits of dirt fell in clumps as they pushed and pulled. Mia glanced back, shining the flashlight down the tunnel. The scraping was so close now, it felt like the creature was right behind the corner. At last, a few thick roots snapped, creating a gap. Sunlight flooded the narrow passage, making them blink. The hole was still small, but maybe large enough to squeeze through. Noah went first, wiggling his body through the tangled opening. He managed to pop out on the other side, disappearing from view. Mia felt a spike of hope. Freedom was right there. The man went next, pushing his shoulders through. His legs kicked in panic for a moment, then he tumbled out with a grunt. Mia heard the creature let out a wet hiss. She spun around, flashlight pointing toward the shape in the tunnel. For one awful second, she saw its pale face peering at her, all dark eyes and gaunt features. She couldn't breathe. Then adrenaline surged. She turned back to the roots and squeezed through the opening. Cool air hit her face and she found herself sliding down a small slope outside. Grass and weeds snagged her clothes. She scrambled away from the hole, kneeling on the ground, trembling. The man lay on his side, gasping, while Noah tried to help him sit up. They were on the far side of the barn's property, near a thick patch of wild bushes. Mia turned to look at the hole they had just come out of. She half expected the creature to burst through after them. Instead, the vines and dirt quivered once, then went still. The hole was hidden by shadows. None of them spoke for a moment, just catching their breath. The sunlight felt too bright after being in that underground darkness. Birds sang somewhere in the distance, a reminder that the ordinary world still existed. Finally, the man spoke in a raspy voice. "Thank you," he said, eyes wide. "I thought I'd never see daylight again." Mia nodded, still shaken. Noah stood and offered Mia a hand up. The three of them looked at the barn's roof, visible beyond some trees. It looked peaceful from the outside, a simple, old building. But they knew the truth. Something lived beneath that barn, something twisted and hungry. Mia felt certain that it wouldn't stay underground forever. She shuddered at the thought of it roaming at night. Noah helped the man walk toward the main road. "We need to call for help," Noah said. Mia checked her phone again. Still no signal. They would have to keep going until they found someone or reached a place with reception. As they moved away from the barn, Mia glanced back. The wind blew across the tall grass, and the sun hid behind a cloud. She wondered if they were truly safe, or if the horror was only just beginning. They followed a narrow trail through overgrown grass, heading toward what Mia guessed was the main road. The man leaned on Noah, still weak from his time underground. Mia walked behind, flashlight in one hand, phone in the other. She kept checking for a signal, but the screen remained empty. Soon they heard the sound of cars rushing by. Relief surged in Mia's chest. They stepped onto a paved road and spotted vehicles zooming past. Noah waved his arms and a small truck pulled over, the driver rolling down the window with a concerned look. The driver, an older woman, listened wide-eyed as Noah gave a quick, shaky explanation. She offered to take them to the nearest gas station where there was better phone service. Mia helped the man climb into the truck's back seat. He clutched her hand, looking scared but also grateful. During the ride, Mia stared out the window, her mind spinning. She couldn't forget the creature's face. Those eyes seemed burned into her thoughts. She wondered how many people had ventured into that barn and never come out. The man had been lucky enough to survive, but for how long? At the gas station, the driver waited with them while they called for help. Mia tried her mother's number first, voice trembling as she explained everything. Her mom's shocked response crackled through the phone. Mia promised to wait there and hung up. Local police arrived not long after. 2 officers stepped out, looking serious. Mia, Noah, and the man told them what happened, though it sounded almost unbelievable. One officer asked if they were sure it wasn't just an animal. Mia insisted she knew what she saw. The man's haunted expression backed up their story. Eventually, an ambulance came for the man. Mia and Noah watched as paramedics helped him onto a stretcher. He clutched Mia's wrist for a moment. "It's still there," he said, voice trembling. "Don't let it get out." Then the paramedics guided him into the ambulance and the doors closed. The officers promised to check the barn. They asked Mia and Noah to stay at the station or go home, where they would be safer. Noah's parents arrived soon after, along with Mia's mother. Embraces were tearful. Everyone was shaken by the story. Despite the relief of being rescued, Mia felt unsettled. She overheard the officers talking. They seemed doubtful about some monster. They might just look around, see an empty barn and leave. Mia knew if they weren't careful, the thing below might slip away. Hours later, with the sun setting, Mia and Noah sat on a bench outside the station. Their parents spoke with an officer inside. Noah pressed his lips together. "What if it hides?" he whispered. "What if they don't find it and it comes after us?" Mia had no answer. She felt a cold dread in her heart. Somewhere beyond the fading daylight, the barn stood silent. The thing beneath it might be waiting, or it might already be on the move. Mia's mother decided to take her home, but she couldn't rest. She sat by her bedroom window, staring into the darkness. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the creature's pale face. Sleep felt impossible. Early the next morning, Mia checked her phone. Noah had texted, saying the police visited the barn at night but found no tunnel entrance. They thought the kids were mistaken. Mia felt anger surge inside her. How could they miss the hidden doors? She got dressed quickly. Her parents were downstairs, talking in low voices. Mia caught pieces of their conversation. They were worried about her. She wanted to tell them the whole truth, but she didn't think they would let her go back to that barn. And she knew she had to return. Something had to be done. Quietly, she slipped out of the house and hopped on her bike. The morning sun was barely up as she pedaled toward Noah's street. He was waiting at the corner, backpack over his shoulder. The look on his face told Mia he had the same idea. Go to the barn and prove the truth. They rode side by side, the cool air whipping past. When they reached the property, they left their bikes behind some bushes. The barn looked the same, old, broken windows, peeling boards. Mia's heart thumped. She remembered the locked door, the trapdoor, and the underground tunnel. Cautiously they approached. The door was slightly open now, the chain gone. Inside, the barn's dusty air greeted them. Mia noticed footprints in the dirt. She guessed the police had been there, but maybe they missed the closet at the back. Noah led the way. Sure enough, the closet door was ajar. The trapdoor in the floor still lay uncovered, but the darkness below looked untouched. Mia's stomach knotted. If the police never found this entrance, they also never faced the monster. She and Noah shone a flashlight down the hole. The ladder and tunnel looked the same, but the air felt colder. Together they climbed down. Mia's heartbeat thundered with each rung. At the bottom, the passage stretched out, still lined with those strange carvings. They followed the route to the chamber. It was empty, with no sign of the man they'd rescued. The leftover junk remained, but the crate piles looked disturbed, as if something had shoved them aside. Mia worried the creature might be lurking nearby. Then they found the smaller crawlspace, the one they had used to escape. The opening was partly collapsed, dirt spilling in. The creature might have tried to chase them or block the path. Mia shivered. Noah spotted fresh claw marks on the tunnel walls. They cut deep into the dirt, shaped like jagged streaks. Whatever made them seemed angry. A chill wrapped around Mia. If this thing was still down here, it could attack at any moment. They pressed on, determined to learn more. They had to find proof for the police, or find a way to stop the creature before it escaped. The deeper they went, the stranger it felt. Mia noticed more of those twisted sun-like symbols carved into the beams. Some were smeared with a dark substance that made her uneasy. Noah moved carefully, keeping the flashlight ahead, scanning for any sign of movement. They came to a fork in the tunnel. One way led back to the chamber they just left, and the other sloped downward, the air turning even colder. Mia hesitated, but Noah stepped forward. "We should see what's down here," he said in a shaky voice. Mia nodded, though fear gnawed at her. The tunnel floor grew wet, and their shoes splashed in shallow puddles. A faint drip sounded, like water seeping through the earth. Each step echoed ominously, reminding Mia how alone they were down here. Suddenly they heard a distant scraping again. Their eyes locked. The creature was somewhere in these tunnels. Mia swallowed hard, thinking about what the rescued man had said. Don't let it get out. That was why they came back, to prevent a bigger disaster. After a few more steps, they found a large wooden door set into the dirt wall. It looked ancient, with rusty hinges. A chain with a broken padlock dangled from a bolt. Noah tried pushing the door, but it stuck. He put his shoulder against it and Mia helped. With a groan, it gave way, opening into a hidden room. Inside, the ceiling was propped up by thick timbers. Strange objects lay scattered. Old candles, bits of bone, and more of those carved symbols on the floor. Mia's stomach lurched. This place felt like some sort of ritual chamber. She picked up a notebook lying half buried in dirt. The cover was damp and moldy, but some pages were still readable. Carefully she flipped through them. Drawings of the twisted sun symbol appeared again and again. Words like binding and seal showed up, though parts of the writing had faded. It seemed that long ago someone tried to keep the creature trapped down here. They might have used those symbols to seal it in place. But the notes hinted that the seal could break if not renewed. Mia realized with horror that maybe this was exactly what had happened. The barn's decay and neglect let the thing slip free. Noah stood watch at the door, shining the flashlight into the tunnel. "We have to find a way to close it in again," Mia whispered. She thought about warning someone else, but they'd already seen how the police dismissed them. Besides, what could ordinary people do? Before they could plan more, they heard a sharp hiss from the tunnel. The flashlight caught a glimpse of a shadow moving fast. Mia's heart leapt to her throat. The creature had found them. They backed away from the door, pressing themselves against the chamber's far wall. The hiss rose in pitch, turning into a throat-rattling growl. If they couldn't reseal the creature, they at least had to escape alive. But right now, the monster stood between them and the only door out. The creature's growl echoed in the small chamber, sending a shiver down Mia's spine. She and Noah clutched each other's arms, eyes locked on the tunnel entrance. They had no exit except through the monster's path. In a burst of courage, Noah swung the flashlight beam at the creature. Light fell on a twisted silhouette with long limbs and pale, tight skin. Its mouth seemed too wide, filled with pointed teeth. A wet snarl came from its throat. Mia grabbed a broken timber from the floor. It was heavy and splintered, but it might serve as a makeshift weapon. The creature shrank from the bright light, hissing. Noah took a step forward, shining the beam right in its face. Mia realized it hated the light just like before. "Keep it busy," she whispered. She glanced around for something else. Her eyes fell on the notebook she'd picked up. Could the symbols help? She knelt down and flipped through pages frantically, spotting a diagram of the twisted sun drawn in thick lines. The text beside it mentioned light, chant, and shadows cast away. Mia's heart pounded. Maybe they needed to recreate some ritual or speak certain words. But the writing was faded. She could only guess at the full instructions. The creature lunged forward, swiping at Noah with bony claws. He yelped and stumbled back but managed to keep the flashlight aimed. Mia brandished the timber. She swung it wildly, connecting with the creature's side. A sickening thud sounded, but it barely flinched. They backed up until they were pressed against the chamber wall. Mia's mind raced. If the monster hated the light, maybe they could use more. But down here they only had a single flashlight and the faint glow of leftover candles. Noah's hand fumbled in his pocket. He pulled out a small lighter, the kind they sometimes used to start campfires. With shaking fingers he flicked it, producing a small flame. Mia snatched a dusty candle from the ground and held it out. Noah lit the wick and a warm glow flickered in the darkness. To their surprise, the creature hissed and backed away another step. The combined light from the flashlight and the candle seemed to hurt it. Mia felt a tiny spark of hope. If they could force it farther back, maybe they could slip past it in the tunnel. Gradually they advanced, waving the candle and shining the flashlight. The monster hissed louder, its dark eyes narrowing. Each step they took made it shuffle backward as if it couldn't stand the brightness. Their plan was working, but they had to be careful. One mistake and it could strike. They inched toward the door. Mia's heart thudded so hard she felt dizzy. Noah kept the flashlight aimed, sweat beading on his forehead. The creature pressed itself against the tunnel wall, snarling. If they could just push it enough, they might slip through the opening and run. But the next part would be the trickiest of all. Mia and Noah stood side by side, using the candle and flashlight as shields against the monster. They were nearly at the threshold of the chamber now. The tunnel beyond was narrow, forcing the creature to stay close to them if it wanted to block their path. Noah cast a glance at Mia, silently asking if they should make a run for it. She nodded, gripping the timber in one hand, the candle in the other. The monster hissed again, twitching in discomfort under the twin lights. In a swift move, they lunged forward, hoping to slip around the creature. It lashed out with a claw, raking Noah's arm. He cried out but kept moving. Mia swung the timber at its head, distracting it for one crucial second. Together they bolted into the tunnel. Darkness swallowed them, but Noah's flashlight guided the way. Behind them, the creature let out a shriek of fury. Claws scraped on the dirt floor as it gave chase. Mia's lungs burned as she sprinted, terror fueling her legs. They turned corners blindly, following the path they remembered from before. The tunnel branched in odd ways, but they stuck to the route that led back to the main chamber. If they could reach the barn ladder, maybe they could climb up and escape. Each scrape and hiss behind them drove them faster. Noah's arm bled from the claw marks, but he gritted his teeth, refusing to slow down. Mia tried not to look back, fearing the sight of that pale face closing in on them. Finally they spotted the wooden ladder leading up. The trapdoor above stood open, showing faint daylight seeping through the barn floor. Without hesitation, Mia climbed first, nearly dropping the candle in her rush. She had to let the flame go out as she grabbed each rung. The moment she reached the barn, she whirled around, holding out the flashlight beam as Noah scrambled up behind her. The creature's head appeared at the base of the ladder, black eyes glinting in the gloom. Mia felt a scream rise in her throat. She shoved an old crate toward the hole, trying to block it. Noah hoisted himself out, panting. Together they dragged more heavy items, piling them over the trapdoor. The creature thrashed below, rattling the ladder. The barn floor vibrated under their feet. They pressed down on the crates, hearts pounding. "Get something to lock it," Mia yelled. Noah darted around, kicking aside junk until he found a large metal beam. He wedged it across the trapdoor, using other debris to keep it pinned. The thrashing below became frantic, but the makeshift barrier held. At last the pounding stopped. An eerie silence fell. Mia and Noah exchanged looks of relief mixed with dread. They were safe, but the creature was still right beneath them. Could it break through later? They had to do something more permanent. Noah's arm bled freely. Mia ripped a strip of cloth from an old rag, binding his wound. "We need help," she said, voice trembling. "Real help, from people who will believe us." Noah nodded, grimacing in pain. The creature was contained, but for how long? They exited the barn into bright midday sunshine. Mia shielded her eyes, still shaken by the darkness below. Noah's arm throbbed, but he insisted he could ride. They fetched their bikes from behind the bushes. As they pedaled away, Mia glanced back at the barn. It looked calm on the outside, giving no hint of the terror within. She hoped the crude barricade would keep the creature trapped, at least long enough for them to find real help. At Noah's house, his parents gasped at the sight of his injury. Mia tried to explain, but they appeared confused and frightened. They called a family doctor to tend Noah's wounds. The doctor asked how it happened, but Mia's story about a strange underground beast sounded unbelievable. He just shook his head and focused on cleaning the claw marks. Meanwhile, Mia's parents arrived, looking pale and upset. Mia's father demanded to know why she had gone back to the barn. She tried to explain that the police had missed the tunnels, that something down there was dangerous. But the more she spoke, the more the adults exchanged worried looks. They seemed to think the kids were overreacting or imagining things. Desperate, Mia asked them to check the wound for any sign of infection or something unnatural. The doctor said it looked like an animal scratch, though deeper than usual. He recommended rest and antibiotics. Mia felt frustrated. Couldn't they see how strange this was? After a long discussion, the parents agreed to contact the authorities again. They phoned the local station, insisting an officer return to the barn. But the station was busy with other calls. Nobody seemed eager to listen to a wild story about monsters. They promised to send someone as soon as possible. Days passed with no sign of official help. Noah's arm slowly healed, but both kids felt a growing sense of dread. What if the creature escaped and hurt more people? Mia tried to gather information from the old notebook, but the pages were so damaged that she could only guess at the rituals and symbols. At night, Mia had nightmares of the monster creeping through the town, tapping on windows. She woke in cold sweats, heart racing. One evening, she confided in Noah that they might be the only ones to act. "We have to seal it away like whoever did before," she said. Noah agreed, though fear shone in his eyes. They spent every spare moment studying the notebook, picking out clues. The repeated mention of light and markings seemed important. If they could recreate the binding symbol around the underground chamber, maybe it would trap the creature for good. But time was running short. They had no idea if the beast had already broken through their crude barrier. Each day without action meant a greater risk. Mia and Noah decided to do something bold. Return to the barn one last time and finish what others started long ago. On a foggy morning, Mia packed a small bag with supplies, extra flashlights, candles, the notebook, and chalk to draw symbols. Noah arrived wearing an old jacket with pockets full of spare batteries and rope. They told their parents they were going for a short bike ride, avoiding the full truth to keep from being stopped. The road to the barn felt lonely, the fog muffling all sound. Mia's stomach churned with nerves. She kept replaying the plan in her mind. First, they would check if the creature was still trapped. Then they would mark the tunnels with the ritual symbols from the notebook. Finally, they would light candles and speak the words as best they could. They left their bikes hidden again and crept toward the barn's door. Everything looked normal, but that didn't calm Mia's racing heart. Inside, dust motes floated in the gray light. The air smelled stale. They approached the trapdoor carefully. The debris they'd piled was still there, but some pieces looked shifted, like something had tried to push through. Mia shuddered. Noah put down the supplies, then carefully removed a few crates to peek. A foul smell wafted up, as if the tunnel had grown more decayed. Mia held her breath. She found a thick plank to use for defense. Noah shined a flashlight inside. The ladder was still in place, but a dark stain marred the steps, as though some oily substance had oozed out. "Ready?" Noah asked, voice barely above a whisper. Mia nodded, forcing herself to be brave. They climbed down, flashlights cutting through the gloom. The corridor was silent. No scraping sounds. Still, they stayed alert, each footstep echoing on the dirt floor. When they reached the main chamber, Mia felt a rush of relief to see the creature wasn't waiting for them. The piles of junk remained, though scattered. She placed candles at several points around the space. Noah used chalk to draw the twisted sun symbol on the walls and floor, copying the pages from the notebook. Her hands trembled as she lit each candle. The flames cast dancing shadows, reminding her of the time they had driven the creature back. Light seemed to be a key part of the ritual. Noah tried to read some of the faded words from the notebook. Though incomplete, they recited them in hushed voices, hoping the meaning would hold power. Nothing happened at first. The chamber stayed still. Mia shared an anxious glance with Noah, afraid they might fail. Then a faint vibration stirred the air. She felt it under her feet, like a distant rumble. The candles flickered. Noah gripped her arm, eyes wide. A sudden, piercing shriek tore through the tunnels. Mia's heart jumped. The monster had sensed the ritual. The temperature dropped and the candle flames wavered. Stones rattled in the walls. Mia and Noah pressed on, chanting what words they could make out, tracing the symbols with shaking hands. Their final confrontation was about to begin. The shriek came again, closer this time, echoing through the underground maze. Mia and Noah stood in a circle of flickering candles, chalk symbols glowing in the weak light. Their voices trembled as they repeated the words from the notebook, hoping each syllable mattered. Suddenly, the creature lunged into the chamber. It seemed more enraged than before. Its pale skin glistened with an oily sheen, and its eyes burned with hateful fury. Mia felt a surge of terror, but also a spark of determination. They couldn't stop now. Noah aimed his flashlight straight at the monster's face. It hissed and shielded its eyes with a clawed hand. Mia seized the moment to light another candle, placing it on the ground near the creature's path. The bright flame forced the beast to back away. The entire chamber shook, dust raining down from the ceiling. It felt as if the tunnels were reacting to their ritual, as though the power that once sealed this horror was coming alive again. Mia's pulse thundered. She and Noah had to keep going no matter how scared they felt. They moved in tandem, setting candles at equal distances, drawing the symbol again and again. The monster prowled around the edges, snarling whenever the light pinned it in place. Each time it tried to dart forward, Mia or Noah shone a beam in its eyes, or thrust a candle in its path. Gradually, the symbol took shape in chalk and candlelight, forming a rough circle that enclosed the chamber. Mia found herself chanting words she barely understood, guided by the notebook's faded script. Noah joined in, his voice raw with tension. The monster roared, swiping at them, but each time the candlelight pushed it back. Its shrieks shook the air and Mia's ears rang. She felt as if they were in the middle of a storm. The ground vibrated, threatening to knock them off their feet. At last, they completed the circle of symbols. The lines connected, creating an unbroken ring around the beast. Mia's lungs burned from chanting, but she kept going. The creature seemed trapped, pacing the perimeter, glaring with black eyes. A surge of energy rippled through the chamber. Mia swore she saw a faint glow in the chalk lines. The monster shrieked in anger. Then, a powerful force slammed into the walls, shaking the entire place. Candles flickered wildly but didn't go out. Slowly, the creature sank to its knees, limbs twitching. It clawed at the air, letting out one last, mournful wail. Then, as if pulled by invisible hands, it collapsed onto the floor. Its body seemed to dissolve, melting into a dark puddle that sank into the dirt. The entire room fell quiet, except for Mia and Noah's labored breathing. Had they done it? Mia watched the black stain vanish, leaving only a few scattered bones. She felt weak with relief, tears slipping down her cheeks. Noah dropped to his knees, pressing a hand over his face. It appeared they had sealed the monster at last. Silence wrapped around them like a heavy blanket. Mia could hardly believe the creature was gone. She and Noah knelt beside the circle of chalk and candles, too exhausted to speak. The candle flames burned steadily, as if guarding them from any leftover darkness. At length Mia caught her breath. She peered at the spot where the monster had vanished. A few small bones lay scattered, turning gray and brittle before her eyes. She reached out, then stopped, afraid to touch them. Noah put a comforting hand on her shoulder. "I think it's over," he said softly, though his voice trembled. Mia nodded, but worry still tugged at her. The old notebook mentioned the seal had to be renewed over time. Was this truly the end, or just a temporary victory? They blew out most of the candles, leaving one for light. The tunnel seemed calmer now, no eerie whispers or scraping sounds. Even the stale smell felt lighter. Mia and Noah gathered their supplies and carefully picked up the scattered bones using an old rag. They placed them in a broken wooden box they found in the debris. Neither wanted to leave remains behind. Slowly they made their way back through the tunnel. The chalk markings glowed faintly in the flashlight beam, forming a path behind them. Mia wondered if they should add more symbols along the entire route just in case. But exhaustion weighed on them like heavy chains. When they climbed the ladder into the barn, daylight poured through the cracks in the walls. They hadn't realized how much time had passed. Everything looked strangely ordinary. Dust motes drifted lazily, and the old boards creaked underfoot. They stepped outside, blinking at the bright afternoon sun. Mia felt like she had spent days underground, yet only hours had passed. Noah stared at the barn with a mix of relief and lingering fear. "We should tell people it's safe now," he said, wincing at the memory of no one believing them before. Mia nodded. "But maybe we don't tell them everything," she replied quietly. "They wouldn't understand the ritual or the creature. They'd just think we're making it up." They agreed to say they found a wild animal's remains and boarded up a dangerous tunnel so no one else would get hurt. The local authorities might check again, but with the monster gone, the barn would seem less ominous. Mia still felt uneasy. What if something else lurked deeper below? But for now, the immediate threat was over. They hopped on their bikes, the broken box of bones tied securely to the back of Noah's. They planned to bury it somewhere far from town, hoping that would keep the creature's evil from returning. As they rode away, Mia glanced over her shoulder one last time. The barn's faded walls stood silent. She didn't see any figure watching from the windows. Still, she sensed that some shadows never vanish completely. They just wait for the right moment to creep back. They biked to a secluded spot by a shallow creek. Tall weeds swayed in the breeze, and the sound of rushing water mixed with bird calls. Mia and Noah felt this place was peaceful, far from the haunted barn. Together they dug a small hole using sticks in their hands. The bones were brittle and light, almost like ashes. Mia shuddered as she transferred them from the box to the ground. Noah said a quiet goodbye, though he wasn't sure who or what he was saying it to. Then they covered the bones with dirt and placed stones on top. When it was done, Mia stood up, wiping her hands on her jeans. The sunlight felt warm on her face. For the first time in days, she breathed without a knot in her chest. Noah squeezed her shoulder gently and she smiled, though her eyes stung with tears. They stayed a while by the creek, letting the natural sounds calm their racing minds. Mia remembered the tunnel's final moments, the fear in the monster's eyes. It almost seemed alive, desperate, and angry. She felt a pang of pity mixed with revulsion. Whatever it was, it hadn't chosen its fate. After a while, they returned to town, each going to their own home. That night, Mia tried to sleep, half expecting nightmares. But she only had vague dreams of swirling shadows that faded when she opened her eyes. In the morning, she awoke feeling more rested than she had in a long time. In the following days, rumors spread about the barn. Some locals said the police found nothing unusual, just old wooden beams and junk. Others whispered that the kids had encountered ghosts or performed strange magic. Mia and Noah kept quiet, offering only brief answers. They didn't care about gossip, just relief that no new victims had appeared. The rescued man who had been taken to the hospital recovered slowly. He told doctors he was homeless, seeking shelter in the barn, and got stuck. No mention of monsters or hidden tunnels ever reached the news. Mia suspected he wanted to forget that nightmare. Noah's scratch healed into thin scars. He wore them like a reminder of their harrowing experience. Mia's mother asked fewer questions once she saw Mia was returning to her normal self. Still, a shadow of worry lingered in her mother's eyes. One afternoon, Mia and Noah visited the barn property from a distance, just to be sure. A new "No Trespassing" sign had been posted, and wooden boards sealed the main door. They felt grateful. At least nobody else would wander in. They sat under a nearby tree, glancing at the barn from afar. Noah asked, "Do you think it's really gone forever?" Mia wanted to say yes, but she couldn't be certain. Instead, she said, "We did everything we could. That has to be enough." They rode away, not looking back. The day was bright, and the road stretched out before them, full of promise that life could be normal again. Weeks passed, and life settled into a gentler rhythm for Mia and Noah. They returned to regular routines: school, homework, and weekend bike rides on safer paths. The barn faded from people's conversations, replaced by new stories and gossip. Yet sometimes, late at night, Mia woke up sweating, certain she heard scratching under the floor. She would sit up, heart pounding, until she convinced herself it was just a dream. Noah admitted he too felt jumpy in the dark. They stayed in touch, reassuring each other that the seal should hold. Then, one cool morning, Mia noticed a strange message on her phone. It came from an unknown number, just a few words: "Check the barn." Her stomach flipped. Was this a prank? Or something worse? She hurried to Noah's house, showing him the text. He looked alarmed but tried to stay calm. They decided to bike by the property again, just to be sure nothing had changed. Their hearts pounded the entire ride, memories of terror flooding back. When they arrived, the barn stood closed, the boards still in place. The "No Trespassing" sign flapped in the breeze. At first glance, everything seemed normal. Mia let out a sigh of relief. Maybe the text was just a cruel joke. But then she spotted footprints in the soft dirt by the barn's side. They looked fresh and deep, made by heavy boots. Noah followed them around the back of the barn, where they found a broken plank leaning against the wall. Someone had pried a board loose. A hole gaped in the barn's side, big enough for a person to slip through. Fear spiked in Mia's chest. "Why would anyone do this?" she whispered. Noah shook his head, eyes wide. Had the intruder gone into the tunnels? Were they trying to find the creature? Or something else? They peered through the hole, seeing the barn's dusty interior. A faint scuffle mark on the floor suggested recent movement. Mia felt a chill. If the intruder broke the seal or disturbed the symbols, the creature's power might awaken again, if any trace still lingered below. "Let's go home and call the police," Noah said, voice tense. "We can't risk going in ourselves." Mia agreed. They had done enough. But as they turned to leave, they heard a muffled cry from inside. It sounded like someone in distress. They froze, hearts racing. Another cry followed, more frantic. Someone was trapped or hurt in there. Mia and Noah exchanged a frightened look. They couldn't just walk away and leave a person behind, not after what happened last time. Shaking, they crawled through the hole. The barn's gloom enveloped them, bringing back terrible memories. The floor smelled musty and beams of sunlight pierced the dusty air. Mia's mind shouted warnings, but she couldn't ignore a cry for help. She and Noah prepared to face the darkness once more, terrified that the nightmare was not over yet. Mia's flashlight cut through the barn's dim interior. She and Noah called out softly, "Hello? Are you hurt?" A faint voice answered, words unclear. They followed the sound, each step stirring up dust. They reached the trapdoor area and found it partially open. Splinters of wood lay scattered, as if someone had pried it loose in a hurry. The cry came again, floating up from below. Mia's stomach churned. She remembered the terror of those tunnels, but someone needed help. Noah crouched by the trapdoor, shining his light down. The ladder was gone, leaving a drop of several feet. They could still climb, using the edges of the hole. Mia peered into the darkness. "Are you okay?" she called. The response was a weak moan. With trembling hands, Mia lowered herself through the opening, feet feeling for a ledge. She found a foothold on some jutting boards. Noah followed, carefully guiding the flashlight. The air below felt colder than before, a chill that reminded Mia of the creature's presence. At the bottom they found footprints in the damp dirt. A fresh scuffle showed someone had stumbled around. Soft sobbing echoed from the tunnel. Mia and Noah hurried forward, fear pounding in their ears. Their flashlights revealed a person sprawled on the ground, a teenager around their age. He clutched his leg, which looked twisted. He blinked up at them, tears streaking his dusty face. "Help," he whispered. "I was trying to see what was down here. I didn't know it was this deep." Mia kneeled, checking his leg. He winced, and she guessed it might be broken or sprained. Noah tore a strip of cloth from his shirt, wrapping it gently. "We need to get him out," he said. But the boy moaned, saying he couldn't walk. Mia's thoughts spun. They couldn't carry him easily up the broken trapdoor. Suddenly, a distant scraping made them all freeze. Noah's flashlight flickered across the tunnel. Mia's throat went dry. Had the creature returned? She thought they'd sealed it, but the intruder might have ruined everything. They heard another scrape, closer this time. Mia remembered the leftover bones they'd buried. She also recalled the possibility of more tunnels or pockets of evil. The boy whimpered, pain and fear in his eyes. Mia and Noah positioned themselves on either side of him, lifting him by the arms. Step by shaky step, they dragged him back toward the trapdoor, hearts hammering. The scraping grew louder, echoing with each movement. When they reached the opening, Noah climbed up first, then helped pull the injured boy. Mia was last, struggling to push herself up. She felt something brush her leg. She let out a shriek, kicking wildly. The scraping turned into a hiss. With a final burst of energy, she hoisted herself out. Noah slammed the trapdoor and shoved the broken ladder over it. The barn fell silent except for their panting. Mia's mind spun. Whatever lurked below was still active. They helped the boy to the hole in the barn's side. Sunlight flooded in, a reminder of safety. As they stumbled outside, Mia knew one thing for certain. Evil still slept in that labyrinth below. Their battle might be won, but the war was far from over. Charles Lindbergh was a famous pilot in the United States. He became a hero when he flew alone across the Atlantic Ocean in 1927. People admired him and followed his life in newspapers. Soon, he married Anne Morrow, and they had a son named Charles Lindbergh Jr. The baby was often called the Lindbergh Baby. The Lindbergh family lived in a large home in New Jersey. It was a quiet place surrounded by trees and fields. The house was still being worked on, but they stayed there to have privacy. Reporters often tried to take photos of the famous pilot and his family, so they needed a peaceful spot. Charles Lindbergh Jr. was a happy baby, with bright eyes and a sweet smile. Many people wanted to see the child of the great pilot, but the parents liked to keep him safe at home. They had staff to help look after the baby in the house. A nurse named Betty Gow helped feed and care for him. During the day, life at the Lindbergh home was calm and pleasant. The baby played or napped in his crib, and family members or staff came in to check on him. At night, the Lindberghs usually followed a simple routine of dinner and rest. Mr. Lindbergh was often busy with flying plans or working on ideas for new airplanes, but he always tried to spend time with his wife and child. However, in early 1932, strange things began to happen around the property. Some workers noticed footprints by the house or saw cars driving by slowly. People thought it might be curious fans or reporters trying to snap pictures. Mr. Lindbergh was protective of his family, so he watched the grounds closely. He did not want strangers snooping around. March 1, 1932, started like any normal day. The baby ate his dinner and was put to bed around 8 p.m. The night was chilly and the wind blew against the windows. Betty Gao checked on the child around 8 o'clock or 8:30 p.m. Everything seemed fine. Mr. and Mrs. Lindbergh were in the house, relaxing after a long day. The staff followed their usual tasks. No one expected danger. Later that evening, Mr. Lindbergh heard a strange noise, like a crack or a thud. At first, he thought it was just a piece of wood snapping in the wind. The house was under construction and little sounds happened all the time. But that noise would soon mean much more. By 10 p.m., Betty Gao returned to check on the baby. She found the crib empty. Blankets were pulled back, but Charles Jr. was gone. Shocked and scared, she ran to tell Mr. Lindbergh. The family rushed to the nursery, hearts pounding. Where was the baby? The window was open and a cold breeze blew the curtains aside. Something terrible had happened. In that moment, the Lindbergh family's life changed forever. The famous pilot's home became the scene of a shocking crime. Little did they know, the search for the Lindbergh baby would become one of the most talked about cases in American history. Chaos spread through the Lindbergh home as soon as they realized the baby was missing. Mr. Lindbergh and the staff searched every room. They opened closets, looked under beds, and checked the hallways. Outside, they shone flashlights around the yard, calling the baby's name. Of course, a 20-month-old child could not just walk away. It was clear someone had taken him. Mrs. Lindbergh was in shock, tears in her eyes. She had never imagined anyone would be bold enough to sneak into their house. Friends and neighbors arrived to help once they heard the terrible news. The family wanted the police involved right away, so Mr. Lindbergh sent someone to call the authorities. When the police arrived, they found a bizarre scene in the nursery. The window was open and on the sill there was a ransom note. It demanded money for the baby's safe return. This piece of paper was written in strange, broken English. It asked for a large sum, $50,000, which was a huge amount at that time. Outside, footprints led away from the house, and under the window, the officers discovered a broken wooden ladder. It looked like the kidnapper climbed up, snatched the baby, then climbed down again. The ladder must have broken during or after the act, making the sound Mr. Lindbergh heard. Everyone felt chills knowing the kidnapper had been so close. Reporters soon heard about the kidnapping. They rushed to the Lindbergh home, snapping photos and asking questions. The house that was once quiet and private became crowded with police, journalists, and curious onlookers. Some neighbors came to show support, while others just wanted to see the famous pilot in crisis. Mr. Lindbergh tried to be strong, focusing on the note. He planned to pay the ransom if it meant getting his son back. The kidnappers had left instructions in the letter about how to communicate. They mentioned including certain symbols in their messages, like circles and holes punched in the paper. This was supposed to prove that any future letters were real. Days passed, and the Lindberghs received more letters from the kidnappers. Each message changed the amount of money or the place to drop it off. Mr. Lindbergh was frustrated. He just wanted his baby home. The police tried to trace the letters or find clues about who wrote them, but progress was slow. People across the country followed the story in newspapers, radios, and magazines. They prayed for the child's safe return. Ordinary citizens volunteered to search the woods or watch suspicious cars. Others wrote letters to the family, giving tips or sharing theories. The authorities were overwhelmed with suggestions that didn't lead anywhere. In the midst of it all, Mrs. Lindbergh grew weaker from worry. She barely ate or slept, waiting for news. Mr. Lindbergh held press conferences, asking the kidnappers to return the baby unharmed. He promised no police tricks if they would just bring back his son. But the kidnappers remained hidden, communicating only through cryptic notes. The entire nation waited in fear and hope. As the ransom letters kept arriving, a new figure entered the scene, a retired schoolteacher named Dr. John F. Condon, often called Jaffe. He wrote a letter to the local paper, offering to help the Lindberghs by serving as a go-between for the ransom exchange. Surprisingly, the kidnappers accepted. They told Mr. Lindbergh that all communication would now go through Dr. Condon. Dr. Condon was an older man who lived in the Bronx in New York City. He was worried about the baby and wanted to help. He placed personal ads in the newspaper, using a special code name. This was how the kidnappers and Dr. Condon traded messages. They arranged secret meetings at night, in cemeteries or on dark streets. It sounded like a mystery novel, but it was very real, and very serious. Mr. Lindbergh watched closely. He trusted Dr. Condon, but everything felt risky. The kidnappers might be dangerous. Still, they had no better choice if they wanted to find the child. At one meeting, Dr. Condon actually spoke face-to-face with a man in the shadows who claimed to be the kidnapper's messenger. The man was careful not to show his face clearly. Dr. Condon noticed he had a foreign accent, maybe German. The kidnapper promised the baby was safe. He said they were hiding him in a boat. The boat's name kept changing in the letters, making it confusing. Dr. Condon tried to get proof that the baby was alive, asking for something that belonged to him. Soon after, a package arrived with the baby's sleeping clothes, which the Lindberghs recognized. That gave them a little hope that the child might still be okay. Days turned into weeks. The public grew restless. Why hadn't the baby returned? Mr. Lindbergh was ready to pay. After more bargaining, the kidnappers agreed on $50,000 in ransom. This was a huge sum of money, especially during the Great Depression when many people struggled to find jobs. Mr. Lindbergh gathered the bills, each one recorded by the police so they could track them later. They even made many of the bills gold certificates, which were less common, hoping that would make them easier to trace. On April 2, 1932, Dr. Condon brought the money to a late-night meeting in a Bronx cemetery. It was dark and tense. The mysterious man appeared, took the money, and handed over a note that said the baby was in a boat called Nellie off the Massachusetts coast. But when the police and the Lindberghs checked the spot, there was no boat and no sign of the baby. Everyone felt betrayed and heartbroken. Reporters wrote headlines calling it a wild goose chase. Some wondered if Dr. Condon had been tricked or if he was part of some scheme. The Lindberghs felt lost. They had done what the kidnappers asked, yet their little boy had not come home. The nation watched, hearts heavy, as time slipped by without good news. After the failed boat clue, the police expanded their search. They questioned people all over New Jersey and nearby states. They checked docks, asked local fishermen, and tried to find anyone who had seen a mysterious boat named Nellie. Nothing turned up. The press began to doubt whether the kidnappers ever had a boat at all. As weeks passed with no real leads, the mood grew darker. The Lindbergh family offered more reward money for any information. Tip letters poured in from people claiming to have seen the child or to know the kidnapper's identity. Most tips were not useful, but the police followed them anyway in case one might be true. Then, on May 12, 1932, the case took a tragic turn. A truck driver pulled over on the side of a road in Hopewell, New Jersey, only a short distance from the Lindbergh home. He walked into the woods to relieve himself and stumbled upon something horrifying: the remains of a small child. The body was badly decomposed, but certain clothes and features matched the Lindbergh baby. News spread fast. The Lindberghs were informed and police rushed to the scene. There was no doubt. This was Charles Lindbergh Jr. The child had likely died the same night he was kidnapped. No one knew if it was an accident or murder. But the result was the same. The Lindbergh baby was gone forever. Grief swept the nation. People who had prayed and hoped for a happy ending were heartbroken. Crowds gathered outside the Lindbergh property, some leaving flowers or notes of sympathy. For the Lindbergh family, the pain was almost too much to bear. Their son had been taken from his crib and left in the woods. It was cruel and tragic. With the discovery of the body, the case changed from a kidnapping to a homicide investigation. The authorities, now including the FBI, worked harder than ever. They knew the ransom had been paid in special bills. If they could track someone spending those bills, it might lead them to the kidnapper. They told banks, stores, and gas stations to watch for gold certificates and record who used them. Mr. Lindbergh, in his deep sadness, still wanted justice. He promised that anyone with real information would be protected. But fear gripped people. If the kidnapper killed the baby, what else might he do to protect himself? Some locals worried about speaking up. Reporters shared the tragic news on front pages. Headlines read, "Lindbergh baby found dead." Many people wept or felt rage against the unknown murderer. Some called it the crime of the century. They wanted answers right away, but the police did not have them. All they had were the ransom bills, the note, and the broken ladder. The funeral was quiet. The Lindbergh baby's coffin was taken away, and the family tried to hide from public eyes. Meanwhile, investigators worked around the clock. They believed someone would eventually try to spend those marked bills. All they could do was wait and watch. Life moved slowly after the terrible discovery. Newspapers wrote about the baby's funeral and showed pictures of a mourning Charles and Ann Lindbergh. Even though the child was gone, the case was far from over. Police needed to catch whoever did this cruel act. The public felt anger and sadness. Strangers wrote letters to the Lindberghs, sending prayers or offering wild theories. Some people accused their neighbors, while others claimed they themselves were the kidnapper. Most of these claims were false, just people wanting attention. The police had to check each lead anyway, which took a lot of time. Back at the Lindbergh home, detectives gathered evidence. They studied the broken ladder, trying to see if it was handmade. Would experts examine the type of lumber and the way it was cut? They hoped it might lead them to the kidnapper's workshop or home. They also looked at the ransom notes again, studying the odd handwriting and spelling. The writer seemed to be foreign, possibly German. Meanwhile, banks reported whenever a gold certificate from the ransom money was used. The police created a list of all serial numbers on those bills. Each time one turned up, they asked the store clerk or bank teller for a description of the person who spent it. Sometimes the customer was never seen again or the memory was fuzzy. The Lindberghs, exhausted by grief, decided to spend time away from their home. Mr. Lindbergh hated seeing the place where his son had been taken. Reporters continued to crowd outside, so the family felt no peace there. They traveled some, trying to find a quiet spot to mourn. Dr. Condon, the go-between, felt guilty. He had tried his best to bring the child home safely, yet it all failed. Some people blamed him, saying he got tricked or didn't handle the ransom deal well. Others said he was brave for trying. Dr. Condon gave more statements to the police, describing the man he met in the cemetery. He recalled the accent and the shape of the man's face, but details were vague. The meeting had been at night and the man kept hiding in the shadows. As the summer of 1932 went on, the police formed special teams to track ransom bills. They believed the kidnapper might be slowly spending them to avoid attention. Time passed with no big breaks, though. People worried the killer might have fled the country. Mr. Lindbergh had many friends in high places, and even they could not speed up the process. Sometimes false rumors spread. One rumor claimed the baby was still alive, and the body found was fake. Another rumor said the Lindberghs knew the kidnapper but protected him. None were true, yet they caused confusion. Through it all, the real kidnapper stayed hidden. Eventually, law enforcement officials told the public to stay alert for gold certificates and to report any suspicious strangers. The case was quiet on the outside, but underneath, officials were collecting evidence. All they needed was one slip-up, a single moment where the kidnapper made a mistake with the ransom money. By 1933, the Lindbergh case continued, but it was not in the front pages every day like before. New events filled the news, including the Great Depression's hardships. Still, detectives kept a close watch for the ransom bills. Many had been found in different cities, but usually too late to catch the spender. One day, an alert bank teller in Manhattan spotted a gold certificate that matched the ransom list. She called the police at once. The customer who used it left, but the teller recalled some details. Police asked around the neighborhood, but the trail went cold again. However, these small clues showed that the kidnapper, or someone who had the ransom money, was still around the New York City area. At the same time, wood experts were working hard on the latter evidence. They examined the nail holes, the way the wood was cut, and the grain pattern. These experts believed that the ladder was partly made from floorboards that had been used in a building. If they could find where those boards came from, they might link it to a suspect. The handwriting experts also studied the ransom notes carefully. They compared each letter's shape, spacing, and mistakes in spelling. If they found someone who wrote in the same style, that could be powerful evidence in court. But handwriting analysis can be tricky, and the kidnapper had tried to disguise his writing. Dr. Condon continued to speak with reporters, sometimes changing details of his story. This made police worry that people would become confused. But Dr. Condon swore he was only trying to be helpful. He said he wanted justice for the little boy. Some folks began to think Dr. Condon liked the attention, though no proof ever showed he was part of the crime. Mr. Lindbergh also got involved with the new Federal Bureau of Investigation, FBI. The FBI director at the time, J. Edgar Hoover, took interest in the case because it crossed state lines. That meant it could be considered a federal crime. Officers now worked together across different states, sharing records and tips. As time wore on, people wondered if the kidnapper had destroyed most of the money or fled. Mr. Lindbergh and his wife tried to move on with their lives, but the pain stayed. They had other children later, but they never forgot the son they lost. Finally, in 1934, nearly 2 years after the crime, there was a big break. A gas station attendant in the Bronx got a gold certificate for a small purchase of gas. He saw that it was on the ransom list and wrote down the car's license plate. When the driver left, the attendant quickly called the police. This was a huge clue. If they could trace the license plate, they might find the person spending the Lindbergh ransom money. Investigators rushed to check the plate number. The car belonged to a man named Bruno Richard Hauptmann who lived in the Bronx. Police grew excited and nervous. Could this be the person behind the most famous kidnapping in the country? Officers wasted no time. They located Bruno Richard Hauptmann's home in the Bronx and kept watch from a distance. They wanted to see if he acted suspicious or tried to leave. At the right moment, they approached him with a warrant, catching him by surprise. Hauptmann was a German immigrant who worked as a carpenter. He lived with his wife Anna, and they had a young child. The police searched his house and found more than $14,000 of the Lindbergh ransom money hidden in his garage. This discovery was huge. It seemed to link Hauptmann directly to the crime. Hauptmann insisted he was innocent. He claimed a friend named Isidor Fisch had left a box with him before returning to Germany. Hauptmann said he opened the box after Fisch died, only to find stacks of money. He claimed he didn't know it was part of the ransom. Many people found this story hard to believe. The police thought he made it up to hide his guilt. Investigators also checked Hauptmann's background. They learned he had a record in Germany for robbery. He came to the United States and said he wanted a fresh start. But now, with the ransom money in his home, the police were certain he was involved in the Lindbergh case. Another piece of evidence was the handwriting comparison. Experts looked at the ransom notes and compared them to samples of Hauptmann's writing. They concluded it was a match, though some debate remained. Hauptmann's lawyers would later argue that handwriting tests can be unreliable. Still, most officials believed it was strong proof. The police also had what experts compare the ladder pieces to what found in Hauptmann's attic. They said some parts of the ladder matched exactly, as if they had been cut from the same board. This was yet another connection. Public attention exploded when the news broke. After 2 years of uncertainty, the police had a suspect in custody. Reporters swarmed the courthouse, and crowds gathered outside, eager to see the man accused of kidnapping the Lindbergh baby. Headlines labeled him, the most hated man in America. Mr. and Mrs. Lindbergh followed the developments closely. They wanted justice for their son. The baby's memory hung over everything, and people were furious that someone could have committed such a heartbreaking crime. Many believed Hauptmann was guilty without question. Others worried the police might have made a mistake, or that the real kidnapper was still free. Hauptmann's wife Anna stood by him. She said he was no criminal, just a simple carpenter. She insisted he was being framed. But the piles of ransom money and the matched wood in his attic were powerful evidence. The case seemed almost certain to go to trial. Everyone prepared for what would be one of the biggest courtroom dramas in the history of true crime. The newspapers called it the trial of the century. The trial of Bruno Richard Hauptmann began in January 1935 in Flemington, New Jersey. Crowds formed outside the courthouse, and extra chairs were brought in for reporters and curious citizens. The nation wanted answers. Was this man truly responsible for the Lindbergh baby's death? Inside, the courtroom had a serious air. The judge reminded everyone to remain calm and respectful. Charles Lindbergh sat with his wife and both looking somber. They wanted to see justice done, but it was also painful to relive details of the kidnapping and the loss of their son. The prosecution laid out their evidence. First, they showed the ransom money discovered in Hauptmann's home. Detectives testified about how they found it hidden behind boards in the garage. Next, handwriting experts compared the ransom notes to samples of Hauptmann's writing. They pointed out similarities in letter shapes, spelling mistakes, and spacing. Then came the wood experts, who said the ladder would match boards from Hauptmann's attic. All these points created a strong chain linking Hauptmann to the crime. Dr. Condon also took the stand. He described his secret meetings with the kidnapper's messenger. He said Hauptmann's voice sounded very similar to the man he spoke with. Though he had not clearly seen the man's face in the dark, he felt sure enough that Hauptmann was the one. Some observers felt Dr. Condon seemed uncertain at times, but overall he pointed to Hauptmann as the person he met. Mr. Lindbergh testified too. He recalled hearing that loud noise the night of the kidnapping and discovering the empty crib. His voice trembled when he spoke about his child. He also said he recognized Hauptmann's voice from a time he might have heard it outside. Critics argued that memory can be flawed, but most people wanted to believe Lindbergh. The defense tried to suggest other explanations. They said Isidor Fisch was the real criminal, leaving the money with Hauptmann unknowingly. They argued that the handwriting test was not fair and that the wood evidence was weak. They insisted Hauptmann was just a scapegoat, chosen because the police were under pressure to solve the case. Journalists wrote daily updates calling the trial tense and dramatic. Members of the public took sides. Some yelled insults at Hauptmann whenever he was taken from the courthouse. Others wondered if the evidence was solid enough or if the police were pushing too hard. But the overall mood leaned strongly toward Hauptmann's guilt. The memory of the baby's death hung heavily in the air. Days turned to weeks as both sides presented their case. Hauptmann himself spoke in his own defense, denying all accusations. He maintained that he was innocent, that the money was left to him, and that he had nothing to do with any kidnapping. But many found his story unconvincing. The jury listened carefully, knowing the fate of this man rested in their hands. If found guilty, Hauptmann could face the death penalty. The whole country held its breath, waiting to see what the verdict would be. After weeks of testimony, the jury left the courtroom to decide Bruno Richard Hauptmann's fate. Tension filled the air as reporters gathered outside, eager for the final answer. Inside, Charles and Lindbergh sat quietly, hoping for closure. Finally, the jury returned. The courtroom went silent. The judge asked if they had reached a verdict. The jury foreman stood and announced that they found Bruno Richard Hauptmann guilty of murder in the first degree. A heavy gasp spread through the audience. The judge thanked the jury for their service, and soon after, Hauptmann was sentenced to death. Crowds outside cheered. Many believed justice had been served for the Lindbergh baby. Newspapers printed bold headlines like, "Hauptmann guilty." People across the country read about the trial's dramatic end. To them, the biggest crime of the century now had a clear villain. Still, not everyone was convinced. Some experts questioned the fairness of the trial. They worried that the evidence was mostly circumstantial, relying heavily on handwriting and wood analysis. The big question remained: could one man sneak into the Lindbergh home, climb a ladder, and carry off a baby alone? Others argued that no matter how risky it sounded, the ransom money and ladder evidence proved Hauptmann's guilt beyond doubt. Hauptmann's wife Anna stood by him. She claimed the police had twisted facts. She said they forced people to say they recognized Hauptmann. Even after the verdict, she tried to appeal the case, hoping a higher court would save him. But the appeals did not change the result. Each time, the courts upheld the guilty verdict. As the months passed, Mr. Lindbergh remained strong in his belief that they had the right man. He and did not speak much publicly anymore. They wanted to protect their privacy and mourn in peace. Eventually, they even moved to Europe for a time, looking to escape the constant attention. The case turned a spotlight on new crime-fighting methods. Police around the country began keeping better track of marked bills. Handwriting experts got more recognition for their work, though some people stayed skeptical. Wood analysis also became a bigger part of investigations in certain cases. The Lindbergh Law was passed, making kidnapping a federal crime if the victim was taken across state lines. In April 1936, Hauptmann was put to death in the electric chair at the New Jersey State Prison. He never confessed, insisting until the end that he was innocent. But the state carried out the sentence. Many Americans felt relief, thinking the matter was settled. Still, even long after, some writers and detectives continued to question parts of the case. Could there have been accomplices? Why did certain details not match up? These doubts led to books and documentaries that tried to uncover more. But no clear evidence was found to overturn the verdict. The Lindbergh kidnapping remained a tragic story of a stolen child and a family's heartbreak, with the official record naming Bruno Richard Hauptmann as the guilty party. Though the main trial ended with Bruno Richard Hauptmann's conviction, the story did not end there in the public's mind. Many people kept talking about the case, pointing out strange parts of the investigation. Some believed the police rushed to blame Hauptmann because of the huge pressure to solve the crime. Others had their own theories about who else could have been involved. One major point of debate was the ladder evidence. The prosecution said a board in Hauptmann's attic matched one used in the ladder. Scientists measured rings in the wood, called growth rings, which seemed to line up perfectly. But defense supporters argued that many boards could look similar. They also noted that the police removed the board from Hauptmann's attic after searching a few times, raising doubts about the chain of evidence. Another question was about the handwriting. The ransom notes were written in poor English with a heavy German style. Hauptmann, a German immigrant, certainly might fit that detail. However, the defense said his English was better than the ransom notes indicated, and that the odd style might have been an act. Handwriting experts testified on both sides, leaving some confusion. Dr. John Condon's behavior also puzzled people. He changed some details of his story each time he spoke. Why would he do that if he was telling the truth? Some thought it might be his old age or excitement. Others feared he might be hiding something bigger. But no proof ever connected him to the crime beyond being a go-between. The biggest point for many was the baby's condition. If the child died the same night, why did the kidnappers keep sending notes and collecting ransom weeks later? Some said it was always about money, and they pretended the baby was alive to get more cash. Others wondered if something went wrong, like a fall from the ladder, causing the child's death by accident. Over the years, different authors wrote books suggesting new suspects. A few pointed fingers at local criminals, while others said it was an inside job involving staff at the Lindbergh home. However, none of these claims were backed by enough hard evidence to replace the official story. Despite the lingering questions, the state of New Jersey declared the case closed after Hauptmann's execution. For Charles Lindbergh and his wife, it was a horrible chapter they wanted to put behind them. They had lost their first child in a brutal way. While justice was served in the eyes of many, the heartbreak never truly healed. As time went on, the kidnapping and trial became a famous piece of American history. People learned about it in school or saw documentaries. Some believed the case was solved, while others thought it remained a mystery. But official records show that the courts found Bruno Richard Hauptmann guilty, and he paid the ultimate price for that crime. Even after the execution, public interest in the Lindbergh case stayed high. Newspapers continued to print stories about new evidence or rumors. One journalist claimed to have found people who saw Hauptmann elsewhere on the night of the crime. Another said they had found a letter pointing to a second kidnapper. Most of these stories fizzled out upon closer inspection. Anna Hauptmann, Bruno's widow, spent much of her life trying to clear his name. She insisted that he was a loving father and not capable of such a terrible deed. She said the money found in their home was just a misunderstanding. She filed legal actions hoping to get a new trial or to show the police used wrong methods. But none succeeded in overturning the verdict. Meanwhile, Charles Lindbergh tried to move forward. He was a national hero before the crime, but afterwards he grew tired of the spotlight. He and Anne had more children and lived in Europe for a while, then returned to the United States. They chose homes far from big cities, seeking privacy from reporters. Over time, Lindbergh flew on important missions in aviation and continued to be recognized for his feats. The Lindbergh baby case brought changes to law enforcement. Kidnapping became a federal offense under the Lindbergh Law in 1932, allowing the FBI to take a larger role. This helped track kidnappers across state lines, making it harder for criminals to hide. Police also began keeping better records of marked bills and improved how they handled physical evidence. For historians and true crime fans, the story had many dramatic elements. A famous family, a nighttime abduction, mysterious ransom notes, a big trial, and an execution. It is often called the crime of the century because of how it captured the nation's attention. At the Lindbergh baby's grave, people sometimes left flowers or notes, showing sadness for the child who never had a chance to grow up. The Lindberghs themselves rarely visited the grave in public, preferring to mourn in private. They carried the sorrow with them for the rest of their lives. As years went by, new technology like DNA testing emerged, but it was far too late to use on the old evidence. Some modern investigators said they wished they could test the latter or the ransom notes for genetic clues, but that chance is gone. All they have are the old photographs, the witness statements, and the final trial records. In many ways, the Lindbergh baby case remains a mix of tragedy and cautionary tale. It shows how fame can bring danger, how criminals might exploit a well-known figure, and how a single event can change a family forever. It also highlights the power of determined detective work, tracing money, wood, and handwriting, to solve a crime. Though some still argue about the details, the official story remains that Bruno Richard Hauptmann acted alone, and justice was done. Decades later, people continue to discuss the Lindbergh kidnapping. Some see it as a clear case solved by solid police work. Others are drawn to the tiny gaps in evidence, building new theories around them. These conversations keep the case alive in books, TV shows, and museum exhibits. One common question is, could Bruno Richard Hauptmann have had a partner? If so, why did that partner never show up or use any of the ransom bills? The official answer is that the police found no evidence of an accomplice. The money was mostly in Hauptmann's possession, and no other suspect was linked to the notes or the latter. Another topic is the role of the Lindbergh family themselves. Some rumors accuse them of hiding facts. For instance, a rumor says Charles Lindbergh played pranks sometimes, and people wonder if this tragedy started as a prank gone wrong. But there is no real evidence for that. Most serious researchers reject the idea, saying the evidence of a forced entry and a ladder points clearly to kidnapping, not a prank. A few investigators focus on the timeline. Mr. Lindbergh claimed to hear a noise at about 9 p.m. The baby was discovered missing around 10 p.m. Some say that leaves only 1 hour for the crime. But kidnappers can be swift, especially if they plan carefully. The broken ladder suggests haste, or maybe the ladder broke by accident. Many small details remain open to guesswork. In the Bronx, people sometimes talk about Bruno Hauptmann's old neighborhood. His former house stands as a reminder of the case, though new families have lived there over the years. Some folks say they feel a chill passing by, thinking of the ransom money once hidden in the garage. Others believe it's just an old story that belongs to a different time. For law students and police academies, the Lindbergh case is often used as a lesson in collecting evidence and dealing with massive public pressure. The trial shows how quickly a community can turn against someone accused of a horrible crime, and how carefully the court must weigh evidence. Some see it as a warning about trial by media, where newspapers and radio stir up strong feelings before all facts are heard. Meanwhile, the Lindbergh name remains famous for Charles's aviation achievements. Despite the tragedy, he continued to inspire pilots. Some younger people only know him as the first person to fly solo across the Atlantic. Yet older generations recall how his fame took a dark turn when his child was kidnapped. It's a reminder that public attention can have a very real downside. Even though the Lindbergh baby case happened long ago, back in 1932, it still sparks sadness and curiosity today. The loss of an innocent child touches hearts, and the mystery of how it all unfolded draws the mind. Whether one believes Hauptmann was solely guilty or not, the crime's impact is undeniable. It stands as one of America's most famous and tragic true crime stories. The Lindbergh kidnapping also changed how famous people approach security. Before this crime, celebrities and heroes in the public eye often felt safe in their private homes. The idea of someone climbing a ladder to steal a child seemed unthinkable. But after this case, many well-known families hired guards or installed alarms, hoping to prevent such a terrible event. Parents everywhere became more cautious too. Newspapers printed advice on how to keep windows locked and watch for strangers. Some worried that if the Lindbergh baby could be taken, any child could be taken. This fear spread beyond New Jersey to the whole country. In New York City, Dr. Condon returned to his regular life, but he was forever linked to the story. People called him Jafsie, the name he used in letters to the kidnappers. Some saw him as a brave go-between. Others thought he was odd or seeking fame. He gave interviews now and then, repeating his view that Hauptmann's voice matched the kidnappers. The police who worked the case also found their careers changed. Some got promotions for their hard work. Others faced criticism for possibly stepping on each other's toes. The Lindbergh home area had police from multiple places: local cops, state troopers, and later the FBI. Coordination was not always perfect. This incident led to improved communication methods in later investigations. Even the field of forensics took a step forward. Scientists began paying closer attention to how handwriting and footprints could solve crimes. The success in linking the latter to Hauptmann's attic boards encouraged detectives to look more deeply at everyday objects in other cases. They realized that small details, nail holes, saw cuts, grain patterns, could hold big clues. As the years rolled on, memorials and exhibits about the Lindbergh baby popped up. Some museums showed newspaper clippings, pieces of the ladder, or old photos. People who visited learned about the strange ransom notes, the secret nighttime meetings, and the final sad discovery in the woods. It stood as a stark reminder that even national heroes can suffer great tragedy. Charles and Lindbergh rarely spoke of the kidnapping in public after a while. They focused on raising their other children and maintaining some sense of normal life. But every time a new article appeared or a radio show mentioned the case, they were reminded of that dark time. The pain never truly left. By the 1950s and 1960s, the story turned into a kind of legend. Younger people heard about it from grandparents or read about it in magazines. True crime books explored every angle, from the design of the ransom notes to the exact route the kidnapper might have taken. Some authors claimed new evidence would clear Hauptmann. Others said it proved him guilty beyond doubt. The debate kept going, making the Lindbergh kidnapping one of the longest discussed cases in modern history. In later decades, technology advanced in ways people in 1932 could never have dreamed. DNA tests, surveillance cameras, and digital records became normal tools for police. True crime fans often wonder what would have happened if those tools had existed during the Lindbergh case. Would investigators have found DNA on the ladder or in the baby's room? Could they have captured the kidnapper's car on a camera near the home? Yet, the crime took place in a simpler time with only basic detective methods. Fingerprints were known, but the kidnapper may not have left clear ones, or the surfaces used did not hold them well. The ransom notes could have carried prints, but people handled them without gloves, smudging any evidence. In many ways, the Lindbergh kidnapping showed the limits of 1930s police work and pushed them to improve. Also, the intense media coverage set an example of how powerful the press could be. Reporters swarmed the Lindbergh property, sometimes trampling possible footprints or disturbing the scene. They published each rumor they heard, creating confusion. This taught future investigators to lock down crime scenes quickly and keep reporters at a distance to protect evidence. Despite these lessons, no one could undo what happened. The Lindbergh baby's loss remained a lasting sorrow. Over time, the kidnapping took on a kind of mythic status. People repeated the story in hushed tones, always ending with the sad truth: the child was never brought home safe. In the broader sense, the Lindbergh case inspired both improvements and caution. Parents learned to guard their children more. Police adopted new ways of tracking ransom money, like writing down all serial numbers. Courtrooms allowed expert witnesses on subjects like handwriting and wood grain. Each step built upon the tragedy, hoping to prevent another similar crime. Bruno Richard Hauptmann's execution closed the book for most officials, yet a handful of researchers kept going back to the transcripts and evidence photos. Some felt a piece was missing, a hidden partner, an unexamined clue. They wrote books or articles claiming a big cover-up or that the real kidnappers were never caught. But in official records, the matter was settled. The courts had their say and the public largely moved on. Looking back, it's clear that the Lindbergh case was more than just a local tragedy. It gripped an entire nation at a time of great hardship. The Great Depression had left people scared and uncertain. Hearing that even the famous Lindbergh family could not keep their child safe shocked everyone. People realized fame and fortune do not provide perfect security. In a way, the Lindbergh kidnapping changed how Americans saw their heroes. They learned that being famous does not mean being untouchable. It also showed that criminals could be bold, even climbing into a second-story window of a well-known aviator's house. This mix of sadness, fear, and curiosity is why the case is still remembered and studied almost a century later. By the 1970s and 1980s, the Lindbergh story continued to appear on television specials and in new true crime books. Writers searched archives for old police files, hoping to find a clue that everyone else missed. Some found that Dr. Condon's stories changed more than they realized. Others tried to track every time a ransom bill was spent. But none of these studies created a major change in the outcome of the case. Anna Hauptmann, still fighting for her husband's name, gave interviews in which she described the hardships she faced after Bruno's arrest. She said neighbors treated her poorly and strangers called her names. She never changed her mind. She believed Bruno was innocent. A few supporters agreed, saying the evidence was not strong enough. However, no new court gave her a chance to retry the case. Meanwhile, Charles Lindbergh grew older and took on different roles in aviation and conservation. He and wrote books about their experiences, though they rarely covered the kidnapping in detail. When they did, it was always with sadness and the wish that no other family would face such a horror. True crime television shows dramatized the kidnapping, sometimes adding fictional elements. They showed actors climbing ladders or forging ransom notes. The public ate up these stories, fascinated by the mix of heroism and tragedy. Museums displayed items like a replica of the ladder, or a copy of the ransom note, letting visitors imagine the drama of that night. For law enforcement, the Lindbergh case stood as a milestone in how to handle massive public attention. They learned to keep crime scenes secure and to coordinate carefully between state and local police. The FBI used the Lindbergh case as an example of how crucial it is to follow the money trail in kidnappings. The marked bills technique proved quite effective, even though it took a long time. As for the baby's nursery, the Lindberghs eventually left that home. Some folks who visited in later years said the room felt haunted by sadness, but that might just be people's imagination. Over time, the property changed hands and parts of the house were renovated. Yet the story of what happened there would never be erased. A small group of believers continued to claim the Lindbergh baby might have survived, though experts dismissed this. The remains found in the woods matched in size and clothing, and the baby's identity was certain. The tragic end could not be undone. In sum, the 1970s and 1980s brought new media attention but no major revelations. The official story stood firm. Bruno Richard Hauptmann was found guilty, and the court said justice was served. Questions lingered only in the realm of speculation and what. The Lindbergh family, for their part, did not engage in these debates. They carried on, keeping private their grief and memories. Heading into the late 20th century, public knowledge of the Lindbergh case became part of American lore. Schools sometimes included it in history lessons. Crime authors placed it next to other famous stories like the Salem witch trials or the assassination of President Kennedy, events that sparked endless debate. Yet for all the discussion, the basic facts remain the same. A baby was taken from his crib in 1932. A ransom was paid and the child was later found dead. Bruno Richard Hauptmann was arrested with a large part of the ransom money and convicted by a jury. He died in the electric chair, still claiming innocence. The Lindbergh family moved on, forever changed by the tragedy. In Hopewell, New Jersey, near where the Lindbergh home stood, the woods are still quiet. Visitors who drive by might see thick trees and gentle hills. They might not guess that the area was once the scene of such a heartbreaking crime. Locals sometimes share the tale, pointing out old roads or places where search parties once roamed. For investigators and true crime fans, the Lindbergh case is a lesson in methodical police work mixed with public emotion. The outpouring of grief and fascination made it a national event, something rarely seen before. It paved the way for how modern media covers big crimes, sometimes turning suspects into notorious figures overnight. Lindbergh himself remained a complicated figure in history. Later, he expressed ideas that some found controversial, but he was still widely respected for his aviation achievements. The kidnapping in many ways overshadowed everything else. People could not forget the image of him as a father who lost his baby to a cruel intruder. In books, the case is described as the moment when Americans realized that no one is truly safe, not even a famous hero. This shift in thinking caused parents to be more protective, and society began to see the darker side of fame. Fans who once adored Lindbergh from afar realized that attention could attract dangerous individuals too. By the turn of the 21st century, technology had advanced so far that some people called for retesting any leftover evidence with new techniques like advanced fingerprint analysis or scanning the ransom notes for chemical traces. However, much of the physical evidence was old or possibly lost, and the case was considered closed. There was no official push to reopen it. Nevertheless, documentaries and articles continued to appear, each retelling the story from a different angle. Some painted Hauptmann as a lone wolf criminal, others hinted at conspiracies involving more people. But no new trial would occur. The matter was settled in the eyes of the courts. And so the Lindbergh kidnapping entered history books as both a solved case and a mystery that some believe is not fully answered. It stands as a stark reminder of how a single event can change lives, shift national attitudes, and spark debates lasting generations. As we move further into the 21st century, the Lindbergh baby kidnapping remains a topic that resurfaces in new forms: podcasts, online forums, and TV specials. Modern storytellers often focus on the emotional weight: a baby stolen in the night, ransom notes, and a frantic search ending in sadness. The raw human pain still touches people's hearts, even many years later. History buffs visit libraries and digital archives to read the original newspaper articles. They see photos of Charles Lindbergh standing tall in front of his plane, and then pictures of him looking shaken after his baby disappeared. They study the ransom note with its odd spelling and swirling handwriting. It's like holding a piece of the past that still feels alive. Some younger generations discover the story by accident, perhaps when learning about the Great Depression or famous Americans. They're shocked that someone could climb a ladder into a hero's house and vanish with a child. They ask if security was weaker back then or if people were too trusting. In many ways, the Lindbergh case answered such questions with a harsh lesson. Researchers sometimes try to find new angles. A few wonder if modern genealogical methods, like checking the DNA of distant relatives, could show if any other suspect might have been involved. Yet, without the baby's DNA or the kidnappers, it seems nearly impossible. Documents from the 1930s hold clues, but no one expects a sudden revelation that completely changes the outcome. In the realm of law enforcement, the Lindbergh case is a historical example of how to handle or mishandle media attention. Today, police departments have spokespersons who manage the flow of information, hoping to avoid the kind of chaos that happened in 1932 when reporters flooded the scene. It also shows why investigating all angles is important, even if the public is desperate for a quick solution. Meanwhile, Bruno Richard Hauptmann's story still sparks debate. People ask if his trial was truly fair. They note that the era's racism and anti-immigrant attitudes might have worked against him. Others say the evidence was more than enough, especially finding him with ransom bills. It's a discussion that may never end as each side sees the facts differently. For the Lindbergh family, the kidnapping stands as a private sorrow despite the public interest. Their descendants rarely discuss it openly, wanting to live normal lives. They know the story is bigger than them, part of a national memory. Still, it is their history too, a piece of personal tragedy overshadowed by fame. Each year, on the anniversary of March 1st, some true crime fans remember the night the baby went missing. They might post about it on social media, share old photos, or hold events to talk about unsolved mysteries. The Lindbergh case, though officially solved, always feels a bit unresolved because it ended in heartbreak and left lingering questions. And that is perhaps why it endures as one of the most famous true crime tales in American history. The Lindbergh Baby Kidnapping remains a solemn chapter in crime history. It reminds us that no one, not even a beloved national hero, is free from tragedy. Over the course of 18 sections, we have followed the story from the baby's disappearance to the trial and execution of Bruno Richard Hauptmann. We have seen how society reacted, how the media shaped the case, and how a family's grief turned into a public event. In the end, official records say Hauptmann acted alone, kidnapped the baby, and caused his death. He was found with a large share of the ransom money, and experts linked him to the latter and the ransom notes. A jury of his peers heard the evidence and deemed him guilty, leading to his death by electrocution in 1936. That is the legal conclusion. Yet the human element endures. A mother and father lost their precious child. They tried everything, offering a reward, working with Dr. Condon, trusting that a ransom exchange might keep the baby safe. Instead, they faced the worst news a parent can get. Their famous status did not protect them. In fact, it might have drawn the wrong kind of attention. The case inspired new laws, new methods of investigation, and fresh caution among parents. It taught the public how quickly a crime scene can become chaotic when reporters and neighbors rush in. It showed the power of tracking currency to catch criminals, even if it takes months or years. It also displayed the importance of collecting physical evidence carefully and analyzing it with scientific detail. Decades later, the story still feels alive. It's told in classrooms, seen in documentaries, and debated at dinner tables by true crime fans. Some feel satisfied that justice was served, while others continue to doubt parts of the case. They note the possible involvement of unknown accomplices or the role of Dr. Condon. Such debates might never settle, but they keep the memory of the Lindbergh baby in the public mind. Today, visitors driving through rural New Jersey might pass the general area of the old Lindbergh estate without realizing its history. The quiet roads and tall trees give little hint of the kidnapping that once gripped a nation. But a quick look at a history marker or a local museum display can bring the past rushing back. In conclusion, the Lindbergh Baby Kidnapping is an unforgettable story of loss, hope, and the long arm of the law. It stands as a key example of how a single crime can affect not just one family, but an entire country. It remains in our collective memory as a cautionary tale about fame, security, and the lengths people will go to for money, or for justice. Though it happened nearly a century ago, its echoes are still felt, reminding us that behind every headline is a human story, full of heartbreak and lessons that shape the world we live in. In January 1947, people in Los Angeles, California, were going about their normal routines. The city was growing quickly after World War II, and many folks came seeking sunshine and movie dreams. Among them was a young woman named Elizabeth Short. She had dark hair, bright eyes, and a hopeful spirit. She had come to California like so many others, wanting a fresh start. Elizabeth Short was sometimes called Betty or Beth. She was born in Massachusetts in 1924. Growing up, she lived part of the time in Florida and Massachusetts. Her parents divorced when she was young, so life was not always easy. As she grew older, she dreamed of going to Hollywood, maybe to be in the movies or just to enjoy the excitement. By early 1947, Elizabeth was staying in the Los Angeles area. She often moved around, sleeping at friends' places or small hotels. People said she was friendly and liked to dress up. She had a fondness for dark clothing, which might have led to her later nickname, the Black Dahlia. The name also may have come from a movie at the time called The Blue Dahlia. In any case, she was known around town for her striking appearance. In mid-January, Elizabeth Short suddenly disappeared from her usual circle of friends. A few people had last seen her at the Biltmore Hotel in downtown Los Angeles. She had told them she was meeting her sister. After that, she vanished. Nobody knew where she had gone. Then, on January 15, 1947, a woman and her daughter were walking in a neighborhood south of Hollywood. They came upon a horrible sight in an empty lot. At first, they thought they had found a broken store mannequin because it looked so pale. But it was actually the body of Elizabeth Short. The police quickly arrived, shocked at the scene. They knew right away that this was no ordinary death. It was clear she had been killed somewhere else and placed in that lot. Detectives immediately began searching for clues, talking to neighbors, and examining the ground for footprints or tire tracks. The local newspapers soon learned about this shocking discovery. They gave Elizabeth Short the nickname the Black Dahlia, which stuck forever. At the police station, reporters called constantly, asking for every detail. Elizabeth's photo appeared in the papers. Everyone wanted to know who had done this terrible thing and why. The police had few leads at first. They learned she was last seen near the Biltmore Hotel, but no one knew for sure where she went afterward. This crime captured attention across the nation. People were scared and sad. A young woman's life had ended in a terrible way, and the killer was still unknown. Many men and women were brought in for questioning, but no clear suspect emerged. As days turned into weeks, the newspapers printed more and more stories, often with dramatic headlines about the Black Dahlia murder. After the body of Elizabeth Short was found, the Los Angeles Police Department, LAPD, put many detectives on the case. They realized it was a high-profile crime, and the public was watching closely. The newspapers added pressure, often printing wild rumors or unconfirmed stories to sell more copies. This increased the stress on the police, who wanted real facts and evidence. Detectives began by learning about Elizabeth's background. They talked to her family in Massachusetts and Florida. Her mother, Phoebe Short, was heartbroken. She said Elizabeth left home to find new opportunities. The police also interviewed former roommates or friends who had seen Elizabeth in Los Angeles. These people said she was nice, sometimes quiet, sometimes outgoing at parties. She did not have a steady job. She mostly got by staying with friends or boyfriends. The police hoped to find someone who saw Elizabeth after she left the Biltmore Hotel. They discovered that she had been spotted by a bellhop and maybe a few people on the street, but the information was unclear. Some said she got into a car with a man, others said she walked away alone. No one could confirm the story exactly. At this time, Los Angeles had many people coming and going. It was easy for someone to slip away unnoticed. Many folks were new to the city, searching for movie roles or better jobs. Police tried to ask local businesses if they saw Elizabeth Short. A few waitresses said they recognized her from a restaurant, but nothing solid came from that. It was like chasing shadows. Local newspapers printed sensational headlines about the Black Dahlia, describing Elizabeth's dark hair and clothes. They added dramatic details about her life, sometimes exaggerating or even making things up. People became fascinated by the mystery. Some tipsters claimed they knew the killer's identity, but when police checked these stories, they usually led nowhere. One strange twist occurred about a week after the body was found. A person claiming to be the killer mailed some of Elizabeth's personal belongings to a local newspaper. These items might have included her birth certificate, photos, and an address book. The package also had a note cut from magazine letters, stating a cryptic message. This caused a frenzy as it seemed the killer was taunting the police. Unfortunately, the prints on the items were wiped clean with gasoline, so no solid fingerprint evidence remained. Detectives realized the murderer might be clever or at least careful. This made the investigation even harder. They tried to match the handwriting from the envelope to suspects, but nothing matched perfectly. As the weeks dragged on, no suspect stood out. The police interviewed dozens, maybe even hundreds, of men who knew Elizabeth or had come into contact with her. Some were boyfriends or just friends. Others were total strangers claiming to be involved. But each time the leads went cold. The question remained, who killed the Black Dahlia and why? News of Elizabeth Short's tragic end spread beyond Los Angeles, reaching people across the United States. The case had all the elements that caught public attention. A young woman, a glamorous city, and a mysterious killer on the loose. Reporters from other states came to California to cover the story. Families worried about the safety of their daughters. Some even wrote letters to the editor demanding better policing. Meanwhile, Elizabeth's family mourned quietly. Her mother, Phoebe, avoided interviews at first. She had been shocked when a reporter tricked her into giving personal details, pretending Elizabeth had won a beauty contest. When she learned the real reason for the call, she felt devastated. However, the reporter used those details to write a newspaper story about Elizabeth's childhood, which sold many copies. Some local Hollywood figures spoke out, saying it was unsafe for young women with no steady jobs to wander from place to place. Others argued that Elizabeth was just unlucky. She had no car, so she often relied on rides from acquaintances. That could have put her in dangerous situations. But no one really knew what happened that final night. The police continued to chase leads. Detectives met with Hollywood club owners, bartenders, and restaurant workers, hoping someone remembered Elizabeth arriving with a suspicious man. They put up flyers in some neighborhoods displaying a photo of her face. They asked the public to share any clues or sightings. Many tips came in, but they conflicted, leading investigators in circles. Police also looked into the possibility that the killer had medical knowledge. The condition of Elizabeth's body suggested the murderer might have known something about anatomy. This clue led them to question doctors, surgeons, medical students, or butchers. Still, nothing solid emerged. The police even considered if it might be connected to other murders, but found no proof of a serial pattern. Around this time, a few individuals falsely confessed to the crime. This happened often in high-profile cases. Some people wanted attention or felt guilty about unrelated issues. The police had to spend time checking each confession, only to discover they were lies. These false leads took resources away from more promising lines of investigation. The newspapers kept the story alive. They wrote daily updates, sometimes using sensational language to describe Elizabeth's life. They focused on her dating habits or claimed she wanted to be a movie star, painting her as a mysterious figure. Friends of Elizabeth said these stories were often untrue or overstated. Still, the public ate them up. Privately, the detectives worried they might never solve the case. Los Angeles was a big city with many hidden corners. The killer, if careful, might vanish. They had no DNA testing or advanced forensics like modern times. Fingerprints, witnesses, and confessions were the main tools. Since the killer left so few clues, it was like searching for a needle in a haystack. But they pressed on, hoping for a break in the weeks to come. As January turned into February 1947, the police still had no major breakthrough. They had a mountain of possible suspects and leads, but all fell apart upon closer inspection. The press kept up the pressure, often criticizing the LAPD for failing to catch the killer quickly. Readers followed each twist, hungry for any new detail about the Black Dahlia case. Detectives reorganized their efforts, forming special teams to focus on certain aspects. One group reviewed Elizabeth Short's life, gathering info from her time in Massachusetts, Florida, and California. They hoped her past might reveal an enemy or troubled relationship. Another group looked at the possible medical connection. They interviewed local doctors, nurses, or anyone who had knowledge of surgical procedures. Yet they found no clear link. Some informants claimed they saw Elizabeth at parties around Hollywood in December 1946. They said she was quiet but friendly, sometimes leaving with people she barely knew. This worried investigators because it meant many strangers had the chance to harm her. The city was full of young hopefuls, and not everyone had good intentions. Out on the streets, people whispered rumors. One rumor said the killer was a mobster who felt wronged. Another said it was a jealous girlfriend. The newspapers printed these tales with flashy headlines. However, detectives had no proof to confirm them. They tried to stay focused on evidence, not gossip. During these weeks, some people started calling the detective bureau and making threats or strange claims. One man said he was the killer and would strike again, but when traced, it turned out to be a prank. Another person mailed letters to the police with weird riddles, talking about Dahlia and darkness. All of this led nowhere, but it took up time and resources. Elizabeth's funeral took place back in her hometown in Massachusetts. Few details were shared publicly, but her mother and sisters attended. It was a sad event. Reports say that the family felt overwhelmed by the media storm. They just wanted to grieve in peace. They placed a headstone with her name, but the memory of her shocking death followed them everywhere. Back in Los Angeles, the leads kept coming. Some people said they saw a suspicious man burying items late at night. Police checked the spot, finding only trash. Others reported hearing screams on the date Elizabeth disappeared. But these tips came weeks after the fact, making it hard to confirm anything. The city was big and nighttime noises were common. The city council discussed whether to offer a large reward for information leading to the killer. They hoped money might convince someone with knowledge to speak up. A reward was announced, though some feared it would attract more false tips. Still, they had to try something. The reward did bring in new calls, but again nothing that cracked the case. As the second month since the murder wrapped up, the Black Dahlia story remained front-page news, with no solution in sight. By the spring of 1947, the Black Dahlia investigation showed signs of stalling. The public grew frustrated. A few other high-profile crimes popped up in Los Angeles, pulling police attention in different directions. Still, some detectives refused to give up. They spent late nights at their desks, reviewing notes, hoping a missing puzzle piece would surface. One detective, named Harry Hansen, became deeply involved. He believed the killer must have had personal contact with Elizabeth Short. It wasn't random. She was targeted, he thought, possibly by someone with an intense grudge or a twisted obsession. He tried to recreate her last known days, speaking to waiters or staff in hotels near the Biltmore. But memories were fading. People mixed up dates or confused Elizabeth with other dark-haired women. Around this time, A witness came forward claiming to have heard a violent argument near the Biltmore on the night Elizabeth vanished. They said they saw a woman in a black outfit arguing with a man in a light-colored car. However, the witness gave few details, and the police couldn't confirm it was truly Elizabeth. Was another maybe. The newspapers capitalized on each rumor. Some wrote about Elizabeth's personal life in a negative way, suggesting she was reckless or had many boyfriends. Others wrote more sympathetically, saying she was just a young woman in a tough city. Elizabeth's friend, Marjorie, told reporters that Elizabeth was sweet, but sometimes naive. She might trust people too easily. A few letters continued to arrive at police stations or news offices, claiming to be from the Black Dahlia Avenger. This unknown writer taunted the authorities, sometimes including cryptic phrases or references to Dahlia's life. But forensic checks showed no usable prints or direct link to known suspects. Investigators suspected these letters were from pranksters or people seeking attention. Meanwhile, the coroner's office made a careful examination of the body. They confirmed some gruesome facts that suggested a controlled manner of harm. They also noticed certain marks indicating she might have been tied up. This fueled the theory about a killer with a methodical approach, maybe someone who planned it thoroughly. But without direct evidence, it was hard to proceed. Local community groups held gatherings to discuss safety. Women in Los Angeles felt frightened. Some groups organized buddy systems for going out at night. Parents wrote letters to the mayor, asking for more streetlights or police patrols. The fear that a dangerous killer roamed free haunted the city. In response, the LAPD tried to assure the public they were doing everything possible. They had a squad of detectives assigned full-time to the Black Dahlia case. They questioned more suspects, including some men who had records for violent crimes. Still, all leads turned cold. By mid-year, the case began slipping off the front pages, replaced by new stories. But it remained unsolved, nagging at the hearts of citizens. They hoped a sudden confession or a big clue would appear. Yet, the killer stayed hidden, leaving Elizabeth Short's murder an open wound for Los Angeles. Summer 1947 came and went, with no big breakthrough in the Black Dahlia investigation. Detectives Harry Hansen and Finis Brown kept rechecking old clues. They would visit the empty lot where Elizabeth's body was found, examining the surroundings again. They'd walk the path a suspect might have taken if they dumped the body. But time had erased many signs. One big challenge was the lack of modern forensic science. Today, DNA and advanced testing might have helped, but in 1947, those tools did not exist. The killer had carefully cleaned items, leaving no easy fingerprints. The investigators had to rely on witness memories, handwriting comparisons, and background checks. A rumor spread that Elizabeth knew a powerful figure in Hollywood, and that this person might have been involved in her death. The police asked around movie studios but found nothing solid. Many aspiring actresses came to Hollywood, and few became real stars. It seemed Elizabeth was just another young dreamer, not someone with deep Hollywood ties. That didn't stop the tabloids. They ran stories claiming Elizabeth went to wild parties or had relationships with important men. Some headlines implied a love triangle. These articles rarely offered facts. They used guesswork and hearsay. The police tried to correct misinformation, but the public enjoyed the scandalous gossip. This made the real investigation more complicated. Meanwhile, a separate murder case in Los Angeles drew attention. Police had to split resources between that new crime and the Dahlia case. Some older detectives believed the Dahlia killer might have already left the city or even the state. They argued that the murderer, seeing so much media coverage, would escape quickly. The LAPD still kept open minds though. Every so often, a new suspect would arise. For example, a doctor with a shady past was questioned. He had a vacant property near where the body was found. This angle seemed promising, but there was no conclusive proof. Eventually he was released. Elizabeth's relatives in the East sent letters to the LAPD, asking if there was any progress. They got polite replies saying the case was still under active investigation. In truth, the trail was cold. Evidence was scarce. Each day made it harder to recall small details. Detective Hansen told reporters he thought the killer was someone who knew Elizabeth well. Maybe they had a falling out or the killer was jealous or controlling. Yet, he couldn't name a specific person. The public waited and hoped for an arrest. Some believed the case would break at any moment. Others felt it would remain a mystery. By late 1947, the press started calling it a cold case, meaning it was unsolved and not moving forward. This disappointed many who wanted justice for Elizabeth. And for every news story about a potential suspect, there was always a reason that suspect didn't quite fit. Thus, the months rolled on, and the shadow of the Black Dahlia crime lingered over Los Angeles, unsolved and unsettling. As 1948 began, the Black Dahlia case had been open for a year with no arrest. People wondered if the police had given up. Officially, the LAPD insisted they were still working on it. Privately, many officers admitted the trail was nearly dead. They lacked fresh clues or strong witnesses. Some detectives reviewed the case files, hoping a small overlooked detail might stand out. They looked at the addresses in Elizabeth's little notebook. Did she meet someone on those pages who turned dangerous? Checking each name took time, and many people had moved or changed phone numbers. The city was ever shifting. In neighborhoods around Hollywood, the memory of the Black Dahlia killing made some residents uneasy. Mothers reminded daughters not to accept rides from strangers. Club owners sometimes warned employees to be careful going home at night. The idea that a cunning killer could be out there stayed in people's minds. Periodically, a new rumor would pop up. One man claimed to have found diaries belonging to Elizabeth, detailing secret affairs. When the police asked for them, he admitted he made up the story. Another woman said her brother confessed to the crime, but he was found to be out of state during the murder. These false leads wasted hours of detective work. A detective named Brian Carr joined the force and studied older unsolved murders. He found that the city had many open cases, some going back years. The Dahlia case was just the most famous. Carr admired the original investigators but saw how limited their resources were. At times, newspapers revisited the story, especially on the anniversary of the crime. They wrote headlines like, "Is the Black Dahlia killer still at large?" Or, "Will we ever know who killed Elizabeth Short?" The articles often recycled the same facts. Found in an empty lot, last seen at the Biltmore, strange letters mailed to the newspaper. Nothing new emerged. Elizabeth's mother, Phoebe, stayed mostly quiet, living with grief. She rarely spoke to reporters anymore, feeling they had caused her pain. She once said she just wanted her daughter's killer caught and brought to justice. But as time passed, her hope faded. In Hollywood, the name Black Dahlia became part of local lore. Some people wrote short stories or scripts based on the case, adding fictional twists. Tour guides on Hollywood buses started mentioning it as a tragic piece of LA history. The city's bright lights and film stars now had a dark underbelly in the public imagination. Even the police decided to look at older murders, thinking maybe the killer had struck before. But none of those old cases matched the details exactly. The Dahlia murder seemed unique. Some believed the killer struck once and never again. Others thought he might have changed tactics or left town. By early 1949, the case was no closer to being solved. The name Elizabeth Short remained in the files. No matter how many times detectives pored over the evidence, the puzzle stayed incomplete. Moving into the 1950s, Los Angeles continued to grow, and the Black Dahlia case stayed unsolved. It held a strange grip on the public imagination. Some locals felt the city had changed forever after that grim discovery in 1947. Though the war was over and Hollywood was booming, the Dahlia crime reminded everyone that danger lurked beneath the glamour. Over time, a few books about the case appeared. They summarized the known facts and offered theories about possible suspects. One author suggested a traveling salesman might have done it. Another claimed Elizabeth was involved with a dangerous crowd. None of these theories came with solid proof. They simply kept the story alive, fueling speculation. Retired police officers sometimes spoke out, sharing personal memories. One said he believed the killer was a doctor who used a different name, but he had no hard evidence. Another officer was sure it was a jealous boyfriend. These stories just added more confusion, since the detectives from 1947 had never confirmed any of them. Some folks in Los Angeles treated the Dahlia story like a ghost tale. They'd point out the vacant lot, although it changed over the years, and whisper about seeing strange shadows there at night. Others made jokes or gave spooky tours. Elizabeth Short became a piece of true crime legend, overshadowing who she really was as a person. Meanwhile, her surviving family members tried to live normal lives. A few distanced themselves from the case, not wanting to be in the spotlight. News reporters occasionally tried to interview them on the anniversary, but mostly they were turned away. The family felt enough harm had been done. In the 1960s, new detective methods came along, like improved fingerprint analysis and the early use of computers to store records. But these methods did not help the Dahlia case much, because the original evidence was incomplete. Some items had been lost and witnesses' memories had faded. The key chance to solve it might have been in the months right after the crime. That window had closed long ago. The city's crime scene changed as well. New murders happened, new headlines took over. The Black Dahlia murder slowly became more of a historical mystery than a current event. Yet it never disappeared fully. Every so often, a newspaper or TV station revived the story, calling it LA's greatest unsolved murder. Los Angeles police officers who joined the force later might study the Dahlia files in training, seeing what they could learn about mistakes made or clues missed. It served as a cautionary tale: secure the crime scene, protect evidence, verify each tip properly. The Dahlia case had suffered from too many sensational reports and false leads. By the end of the 1950s, a few older detectives who once worked on the case had passed away or retired. Fresh investigators who looked at the old files saw how tough it would be to solve. Too many years had gone by and too much evidence was gone. Yet the legend of the Black Dahlia lived on. As the 1970s came around, true crime writing became more popular. Readers wanted in-depth looks at famous unsolved murders. The Black Dahlia case was often featured in books, magazines, and TV programs. Authors pieced together old police notes, interviews, and newspaper articles, trying to form new theories. One popular theory suggested that Elizabeth Short's killer had medical training because of the condition of her body. A few doctors were named as possible suspects. Some had suspicious backgrounds, others had questionable lifestyles. Yet no firm evidence ever linked them directly to the crime. It was mostly speculation. Another theory pointed to an actor or musician who might have known Elizabeth. People said she often visited clubs, so maybe she crossed paths with a dangerous person in the entertainment world. Again, no solid proof emerged. The case had grown into a puzzle, and puzzle lovers found it irresistible. During this period, a few individuals claimed they had solved the murder. A man in Texas wrote to the LAPD, saying his deceased father had admitted it on his deathbed. But the father's name was unknown to the police, and there was no sign he'd even been in Los Angeles at the time. Another woman said her ex-husband bragged about it, but he also lacked any real ties to Elizabeth Short. These stories kept the police busy, but none led to a conclusion. The nickname Black Dahlia became part of pop culture. Bands wrote songs about it and references appeared in movies. The real woman, Elizabeth Short, faded behind the myth. Writers described her as a mysterious figure, ignoring that she was once a real person with hopes and family. Some turned her into a symbol of old Hollywood's dark side. Despite all this attention, the LAPD still had the same problem: no fresh evidence. The original items, like the letters mailed to newspapers or the suspicious package of Elizabeth's belongings, were not giving any new clues. Technology had advanced, but the chain of custody for evidence was weak. Some materials had gone missing or were poorly stored. A few retired detectives voiced regret about not catching the killer when the trail was hot. They blamed the chaotic press coverage, the false confessions, and the huge population boom in LA. They said it was like trying to find a single grain of sand on the beach. By the late 1970s, the case was over 30 years old. Younger officers had only heard stories. They saw how the world had changed. Highways were built, neighborhoods transformed, witnesses moved away. Solving such an old case seemed nearly impossible. Still, the name Black Dahlia popped up in conversation whenever people discussed Los Angeles legends. In a way, the lack of closure only fueled the story. The city had grown big and bright, but it held dark secrets in its past. And the Black Dahlia murder was its biggest unsolved secret. Books and films continued to appear, each claiming to have the final answer. None convinced the authorities enough to reopen the case officially. The 1980s brought another wave of interest in historical true crime cases, including the Black Dahlia. Television programs dedicated entire episodes to it, showing old black and white photos of Elizabeth Short and the empty lot. They interviewed retired cops and neighbors, who sometimes offered dramatic but fuzzy memories. Ratings soared whenever this infamous case hit the air. Writers and researchers dug through archives, searching for hidden police documents or interviews that might have been overlooked. Some found letters or diaries from people around Los Angeles in the 1940s. They pieced together timelines, listing who Elizabeth Short met in her final days. The puzzle grew bigger, not smaller. In 1987, a major book on the Dahlia case was published. The author suggested a specific suspect, a man who supposedly had personal ties to Elizabeth. But the man was long dead, and the evidence was mostly circumstantial. The author's claims made headlines, but the LAPD did not consider it enough to solve the crime. It was just one more theory in a growing stack. Around the same time, certain older reports surfaced that the police might have had strong suspects but didn't push hard enough. Some said the suspect's family was influential, causing the case to be buried. Others believed the city didn't want more bad publicity. No real proof for such conspiracies emerged, yet they made for gripping stories. Elizabeth Short's family, meanwhile, had gone on with their lives. Some had changed their names to avoid the association. Others quietly acknowledged her memory but stayed away from media. They understood that each new book or TV special about the Black Dahlia might bring more phone calls and painful reminders. Within the LAPD, the case file lay dormant. Occasional detectives glanced at it, but there was no official cold case unit with modern technology devoted to it at that time. Many in law enforcement thought it was just too old. Witnesses would be elderly or deceased. The killer, if alive, would be quite old as well. Despite the long odds, the Black Dahlia's grip on the public mind did not loosen. Tourists visited the location where Elizabeth was discovered, though the neighborhood had changed, and took pictures. Some local tour companies mentioned it on their Hollywood crime tours, weaving fact and rumor together. Hollywood itself continued to romanticize the story, sometimes mixing it with fiction. Films used the name Black Dahlia for an aura of mystery and noir style. This only blurred the line between real events and cinematic tales. The actual Elizabeth Short became a symbol of unsolved murder in a glamorous city, overshadowed by sensational details. By the end of the 1980s, it had been over 40 years since the murder. Younger generations knew the Black Dahlia only as a legend. Still, the question remained, who was truly responsible for Elizabeth Short's death? And could any final proof ever come to light? In the 1990s, true crime documentaries on cable TV gained popularity. The Black Dahlia case often appeared in these shows. Producers interviewed authors, retired detectives, and people who claimed to have inside information. Some episodes would recreate the final days of Elizabeth Short with actors, trying to show what might have happened. Although dramatic, they offered little new evidence. During this time, a wave of public interest in unsolved cases led to calls for cold case squads. The Los Angeles Police Department began forming units to re-examine old crimes with updated forensic techniques. DNA testing had become a powerful tool. However, the Dahlia murder had so little preserved evidence that applying DNA seemed unlikely. If they had the killer's blood or hair, it might help, but that was never found. A detective named John St. John, nicknamed Jigsaw John, was known for working on cold cases. He took a look at the Dahlia file briefly but concluded there was not enough physical evidence to move forward. Still, he respected the earlier detectives who had tried so hard. He said they were hampered by the large amount of false tips and the huge media circus. Around this time, new theories emerged. One claimed that Elizabeth Short had been staying in a certain Hollywood house, known for parties. Another said she was friendly with an older woman who might have led her into dangerous circles. People came forward claiming they were stepchildren or nieces of the supposed killer, but none offered proof that the police found convincing. In 1997, the 50th anniversary of Elizabeth's murder revived interest once again. Newspapers ran stories titled 50 Years Later, The Black Dahlia Mystery Endures. Some journalists tried to track old witnesses, but most were deceased or had failing memories. The sense that the case might never be solved settled in even more. Meanwhile, Hollywood used the anniversary to produce more content. A major film about the Black Dahlia was announced. It mixed fictional characters with the real murder, focusing on the city's noir style of the 1940s. Critics said it was entertaining but blurred the facts further. The movie created new fans who dove into the real-life mystery, only to find it unsolved. Elizabeth's image, dark hair, bright eyes, became iconic in true crime culture. Some saw it as an example of how LA could be a dream or a nightmare. She represented countless young people who arrived with big hopes, only to face danger and tragedy. Despite the attention, no new official action took place. The LAPD had many active crimes to handle. The Dahlia was a historical case with slim leads. Occasionally, police answered calls from authors or tipsters, but each new lead repeated old claims or lacked evidence. Thus, as the 20th century ended, the story remained the same. A brutal murder, a city scandalized, a victim turned into a legend, and a killer who vanished into the shadows of history. Entering the 2000s, technology advanced rapidly, and so did public fascination with cold cases. Websites and online forums emerged, letting amateur detectives discuss the Black Dahlia case. People from all over the world shared theories, newspaper clippings, and old photos. Some did deep dives into city archives. This fresh wave of interest provided a few new angles, but still no final answer. One development was the rise of citizen detectives, everyday people who used the internet to investigate. They looked at public records, old phone books, and maps from 1947 Los Angeles. They tried to track Elizabeth Short's steps, listing every building she might have visited. Some discovered inconsistencies in earlier accounts. But turning that into proof of a suspect was another matter. In 2003, a retired police officer named Steve Hodel published a book claiming his own father, Dr. George Hodel, was the Black Dahlia killer. Steve pointed to old photos, a handwriting match, and his father's strange behavior. The claims made headlines and some readers found them persuasive. However, critics noted that none of it was conclusive. The LAPD did not reopen the case based on the book. Still, Steve Hodel's theory drew wide attention. He said his father was a wealthy, influential doctor who had knowledge of anatomy. He explained that Dr. Hodel once lived in a mansion with secret rooms. This matched the idea that Elizabeth's killer might have been skilled in surgery or body handling. People debated this theory online and at book clubs. Some found it compelling, others said it was circumstantial. Another wave of Dahlia interest came from TV specials that followed. They interviewed Steve Hodel, examined the mansion, and brought in experts on handwriting. While intriguing, the shows couldn't prove the father's guilt beyond a doubt. It remained one of many suspects in the Dahlia's long history. Meanwhile, new generations discovered the story through these modern outlets. They found it both tragic and captivating. The image of Elizabeth Short, now seen mainly in black and white photos, seemed frozen in time. Her unsolved case symbolized the darker side of Hollywood's golden age. Elizabeth's relatives, or those who still acknowledged a connection, seldom spoke publicly. The shame or pain of her murder lingered. Some extended family members felt the case was best left alone, seeing no benefit in stirring up old sadness. Law enforcement officials, when asked, repeated that there was no active Dahlia investigation. They said any new evidence could be submitted, but the bar was high. Without physical proof linking a suspect to the crime, the conversation was purely speculative. The official stance was that it remained unsolved and likely would stay that way. By 2010, the Black Dahlia had been unsolved for over 6 decades. She was no longer just Elizabeth Short, a hopeful young woman from Massachusetts. She was a legend, the subject of books, films, websites, and fierce debate. Yet the real story of her life and final hours remained elusive, hidden in the mists of old Los Angeles. As the 2010s progressed, the Black Dahlia case continued to attract storytellers. Podcasts became a new venue for discussing true crime. Shows dedicated entire seasons to re-examining the murder, interviewing experts, historians, or retired cops. Hosts and guests combed through old newspapers, analyzing contradictory reports. They sometimes staged what-if scenarios, imagining how modern policing might solve it. In these podcasts, Elizabeth Short was usually portrayed as a kind, shy young woman who fell into unfortunate circumstances. Some episodes tried to restore her humanity, moving away from the sensational nickname. They discussed her childhood, her love for movies, and her wish to find a steady life. Listeners responded well, with many saying they learned more about Elizabeth as a real person, not just a symbol. Sociologists noted how the Dahlia case reflected mid-20th century attitudes toward women, fame, and crime. They said it demonstrated how newspapers often judged a victim's character or lifestyle. The tabloids had called Elizabeth an adventuress, sometimes implying she was to blame for roaming the city alone. Modern observers recognized that she was just an ordinary person in a dangerous situation, and that victim blaming was unfair. During this period, new digital archives of old LA newspapers emerged. Researchers could read every 1947 headline from their computers. They found small details that earlier writers missed, like mention of Elizabeth's movie preferences or small interviews with her old neighbors. These bits didn't solve the murder, but they painted a fuller picture of her life. Occasionally, someone would come forward with a rumored piece of evidence, a photograph said to show Elizabeth with a certain suspect, or a diary entry about a suspicious neighbor. Yet these items rarely held up under scrutiny. The photograph might be of a different woman who merely looked like Elizabeth. The diary might be out of context. Without official confirmation, these potential clues fizzled out. In 2017, on the 70th anniversary of the murder, local news stations revisited the story. Reporters stood near the place where Elizabeth's body was discovered, though it had changed a lot. They interviewed older residents or the descendants of cops who once worked the case. The general conclusion was that it still had no resolution. The killer's identity remained locked in the past. Some watchers of the special anniversary coverage felt that with each passing year, the odds of a breakthrough lessened. Anyone directly involved would likely be deceased, and physical evidence was minimal. Others clung to hope that a hidden letter or a deathbed confession might yet surface, revealing the truth. Meanwhile, Elizabeth Short's memory carried on in many forms: memorial websites, true crime tours, documentaries, and new books. Each retelling had the same question: who killed the Black Dahlia? And every time the answer was the same: we don't know. Despite decades of research and speculation, the case remained locked, a puzzle that only the real killer, or a miracle piece of evidence, could ever solve. By the late 2010s, people began studying the Black Dahlia case from different angles beyond just finding the killer. Some focused on the media's role. In the 1940s, newspapers often invaded crime scenes and printed rumors as facts. This chaotic environment might have destroyed clues or scared potential witnesses. Modern critics said if the media had been more responsible, detectives might have had a better chance. Others looked at policing in 1940s Los Angeles. The department was under pressure to keep the city's image clean for tourism and the movie industry. Corruption was also an issue at various levels, according to certain historians. Could a powerful person have influenced the case, hiding important evidence? This remains speculation, but it reflects how some see the Dahlia mystery as part of a bigger story of old LA politics. A different group studied Elizabeth's background more deeply. They talked about the heartbreak of her early life and how she moved around the country. They interviewed people who knew her family. Some wanted to show that Elizabeth wasn't just the Black Dahlia, but a real person who had dreams, friends, and a mother who loved her. These efforts aimed to remind everyone that behind every murder victim is a human being, not just a headline. Social media also played a part. Hashtags like #BlackDahlia popped up on Twitter or Instagram, where amateur sleuths shared theories. People posted photos of old documents or walked around Los Angeles filming the sites connected to the case. In some ways it felt like a community detective project, but it still lacked the official authority to crack the case. A few authors wrote novels loosely based on Elizabeth Short's story. They used fictional detectives or alternate timelines to imagine different endings. These novels sometimes sparked debate about the line between real tragedy and entertainment. But they also showed how the Dahlia story continued to inspire creative work, even if it was sad and chilling. LAPD occasionally received inquiries, but official statements were minimal. They said the case was unsolved, that no new evidence had been tested, and that they welcomed any legitimate tips. However, they had little hope of a sudden resolution. The physical evidence from 1947 was either lost, degraded, or never collected well in the first place. As the year 2020 approached, the case marked over 70 years with no arrest. The city around it had changed drastically: taller buildings, new freeways, bigger population. Yet the memory of that day in January 1947 still lingered, as if frozen in time. Tour guides sometimes stopped at the location, explaining the gloom that once fell there. The Black Dahlia story remained a symbol of Hollywood's golden era turned dark, a cautionary tale about the illusions of fame and the dangers that can hide behind bright lights. For Elizabeth's relatives, it was a loss that never found closure. And for true crime enthusiasts, it was the ultimate unsolved puzzle, big, baffling, and haunting. As the 2020s got underway, interest in the Black Dahlia case continued. True crime conventions invited speakers who had written or researched it. Panels discussed the latest books, comparing suspects, clues, and detective methods. In a world full of new crimes and modern mysteries, the Dahlia case retained a unique allure, probably due to its blend of Hollywood, tragedy, and the unsolved question. Television networks aired updated specials, sometimes featuring advanced facial recognition or genealogical research. They tried to see if Elizabeth Short's ancestry or connections might hint at hidden relatives with knowledge. These attempts made for engaging television but did not crack the case. The same roadblocks remained: no confirmed killer's DNA, no direct eyewitness to the final moments. Interestingly, a few genealogists traced some of Elizabeth's extended family lines. They found distant cousins, many of whom never knew her personally. While it shed light on her family tree, it offered no new suspect. The question of who ended her life hinged on evidence from that fateful night, not family records. Meanwhile, social attitudes had shifted. People cared more about victim-centered storytelling. Writers tried to highlight Elizabeth's voice in their works, quoting her letters or statements from old friends. They aimed to treat her with respect rather than sensationalism. This movement helped younger audiences see her as a person, not just a tragic figure. Some articles refrained from using the nickname Black Dahlia, calling her by her real name. However, the old sensational stories never fully faded. Some tabloids and websites kept reprinting the same lurid rumors. They still sold, proving that the dark mystique of the Dahlia brand had its place. Yet, more thoughtful media tried to move past that, focusing on the unsolved nature of the crime and the flaws in the investigation. Police departments in big cities now had sophisticated cold case divisions, but their resources were usually aimed at cases with workable leads, especially those from recent decades where DNA might be available. The Dahlia case from 1947 was not a priority. It would take something remarkable, like a hidden confession letter from the killer, or a newly discovered piece of evidence stored in an attic, to make them reopen the investigation in earnest. Some local historians launched projects to archive everything related to the Dahlia, scanning old police notes, collecting interviews from children of the original detectives, and preserving news clippings. They wanted a single digital library so future generations could study the case. This was partly to honor Elizabeth Short and partly to ensure no clue went overlooked. But even with that, the final piece of the puzzle remained missing. For the average person, the Dahlia case was a spooky legend about Los Angeles, a reflection of how the city's glitz can hide shadows. People told the story at parties or around campfires, describing how the bright lights of Hollywood drew in dreamers like Elizabeth, and how those dreams sometimes ended in heartbreak, and in this case, a chilling, enduring mystery. Approaching 75 years since the murder, the Black Dahlia story had become woven into Los Angeles folklore. Tour buses pointed out the approximate location of the murder scene, though the land and surroundings had changed. Some people left flowers there, paying quiet respect to a woman they never knew. Others snapped pictures, chasing the thrill of standing near an infamous crime spot. The concept of dark tourism gained traction, where visitors sought out places associated with death or tragedy. The Dahlia site was one of many stops in Los Angeles, alongside spots linked to other crimes. Critics felt uneasy about turning real-life horror into a tourist attraction, while supporters said it was a way to remember the past and reflect on safety. Television and film producers still used the Black Dahlia as a catchy reference. A movie adaptation of a fictional novel loosely based on the case came out some years prior. People watched, then looked up the real facts, often shocked at how different they were from the fictional version. This cycle of media retellings kept the story alive but also blurred reality and myth. For amateur detectives, the age of the internet made collaboration possible. They formed chat groups, analyzed old photos, and debated every suspect in detail. Some members were professional researchers or even had backgrounds in law enforcement. They pored over maps of 1940s Los Angeles, identifying possible routes a killer could have taken. They studied the times of old train schedules or bus lines, imagining how someone might escape. Yet no consensus emerged, just more spirited discussion. Occasionally, a person came forward with a new tip, claiming their late uncle or grandfather was the killer. But the details rarely checked out. It seemed that almost every angle had been explored without result. The story's enduring appeal might be that it is unsolvable, ensuring endless speculation. The conversation around Elizabeth Short also changed somewhat. People wanted to do justice to her memory by not focusing solely on the gruesome aspects. They mentioned her as a real human, describing her kindness, her desire to look fashionable, and her hopes to find a stable life. Some articles included quotes from her letters to her mother, showing warmth and normalcy. Police at the Hollywood station occasionally received calls about the case. They politely explained that it was still unsolved, that all major leads had been investigated, and that tips could be submitted in writing. But the official stance was that the case lacked enough evidence for a modern solution. The giant city files sat in archives rarely touched. Despite this, the unsolved status gave the Dahlia story a lasting place in American crime history. Countless other homicides were solved and then forgotten, but not this one. The mix of Hollywood's sparkle, the tragic victim, and the horrifying nature of the crime set it apart. As each year passed, the Black Dahlia became less of a current investigation and more of a haunting legend, reminding people that not every puzzle finds its solution. As the 2020s continued, the Black Dahlia case stood as a stark reminder of a bygone era. People sometimes compared it to other famous unsolved crimes, like Jack the Ripper in London. Both had unknown killers, a series of sensational newspaper stories, and a victim or victims who became legendary figures. In each case, the public's imagination kept them alive. Historians wrote essays about the social conditions of Los Angeles in the late 1940s, how returning soldiers, rising film studios, and housing shortages created a city of contrasts. They noted that Elizabeth Short's murder happened at a time when people were both hopeful about post-war prosperity and fearful of hidden dangers. The Black Dahlia case, they argued, symbolized that hidden danger. Some authors also looked at how the media portrayed Elizabeth Short, pointing to sexist language or sensational coverage that overshadowed her humanity. In modern times, many recognized these flaws. People tried to speak of her with compassion, seeing her as a victim who never got justice, rather than a figure in a lurid tabloid story. In pop culture, references to the Black Dahlia still popped up. Television crime shows made fictional episodes based on the Dahlia case, with changed names or settings. Musicians used the nickname for songs or albums. Even fashion brands occasionally cited Black Dahlia for edgy lines of clothing. This showed how the term evolved beyond the actual murder, becoming a symbol for something dark and mysterious. For the families living near the site, the story was less glamorous. They occasionally had to deal with curious tourists or camera crews. Some older residents remembered hearing their parents talk about the day the body was found. They knew the city had changed drastically since then. The block was no longer empty fields but had houses, fences, or even apartments. Local police officers who were asked about the case typically expressed regret that it remained unsolved. They'd say things like, "We wish we had the technology back then that we do now." But they also recognized that even with today's tools, the success of a criminal investigation depends on preserving the crime scene, collecting samples, and having witnesses. Many of those opportunities were lost in 1947. As for Elizabeth Short's memory, a few dedicated fans or historians made efforts to keep her true story alive. They posted respectful tributes online on the anniversary of her death, reminding people that she was more than a nickname. They shared pictures of her smiling or letters she wrote to friends, so people would see her as a person with a life story rather than a macabre headline. This gentle shift in tone showed that while the Dahlia case might always have a dark fascination, there was also room to honor Elizabeth. Still, the question of who killed her lingered, with no official suspect confirmed. The case that started in January 1947 continued to rest, an unsolved heartbreak in the annals of Los Angeles history. Now, over 75 years after Elizabeth Short's tragic death, the Black Dahlia case stands as one of America's most infamous unsolved murders. It reminds us that sometimes, even with massive public attention, a crime can remain a mystery. Evidence can slip away, witnesses move on, and police methods may fall short, especially in an era without modern science. Today, Elizabeth Short's name still appears in books, documentaries, podcasts, and tours. She has become a symbol of old Hollywood's shadow side, where bright ambitions could meet dark endings. Some might say her story warns us about the dangers of trusting strangers or the harshness of big cities. Others see it as a tale of how the media can sensationalize a tragedy. Either way, the fascination continues. For the Los Angeles Police Department, the case file remains open in name but inactive in reality. Every so often, a tip arrives but it never develops into real proof. The city has evolved into a sprawling metropolis, far different from what it was in 1947. The corner where Elizabeth's body was found hardly resembles its past. Time has washed away many physical traces. Elizabeth's life, short as it was, now belongs partly to legend. She is forever the Black Dahlia, a name that overshadowed her real identity. Efforts by modern writers and filmmakers to reclaim her humanity have shown new generations that she was not just a victim, but a daughter, a friend, and a dreamer. The killer, whoever they were, likely passed away long ago. If they left behind a confession in a letter or diary, it has never surfaced publicly. Family members of potential suspects have come forward with stories, but none convinced the police. The official stance remains that the evidence is too thin for charges. Even so, the public imagination does not let go. People want closure, a face behind the crime, a reason. But the deeper they dig, the more they find complicated trails, half-truths, and second-hand accounts. In the end, the Black Dahlia is a riddle made of rumor and incomplete facts. In remembering Elizabeth Short, some have moved away from the sensational nickname. They call her by her real name, share her photos smiling, and speak of her life beyond that final, cruel moment. It's a small way of giving back her dignity. While the mystery remains, at least she is remembered as a person. In the grand scope of American crime history, the Black Dahlia remains a towering question mark, both captivating and saddening. It has influenced countless stories about Los Angeles, reinforcing the idea that behind the glitter can lurk something grim. And yet, it also shows how communities try to protect their members and seek justice. Sadly, justice did not arrive for Elizabeth Short, and the memory of that fact keeps the story alive for future generations to reflect upon and learn from.